I still remember the exact moment when my world shattered. The way the evening light filtered through our apartment windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors we'd picked out together. The faint scent of the dinner I'd prepared with such care. Her favorite pasta with the handmade sauce that took hours to simmer. The soft music playing in the background. A playlist I'd curated specifically for this night, our 5th anniversary. And then there was her face. Distant. Cold. Like I was looking at a stranger wearing the features of the woman I loved. "I need to tell you something, Alex," she said, her voice eerily calm. My heart skipped as I set down my wine glass, already sensing that whatever came next would change everything. "What is it, Vanessa?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't even have the decency to look remorseful when she said it. "I never loved you." 4 words. Just 4 simple words. But they hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I must have misheard her. Must have misunderstood. "What are you talking about?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes, those beautiful hazel eyes I'd gazed into countless times, held nothing but impatience, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "I never loved you, Alex." "Not really. I thought I could make it work. I tried, but I can't do this anymore." The room seemed to tilt around me. 5 years. 5 years of my life given to someone who claimed she had never loved me. Every shared laugh, every whispered promise, every plan we'd made for our future. All of it a lie. Is there someone else? The question felt cliché even as it left my lips, but I needed to know. A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, crossed her face before her expression hardened again. "Yes, his name is James. He's my boss." James, her boss at Meridian Financial? The company where she'd been working for the past 3 years. The man she'd mentioned in passing, always professionally, always carefully. The man who'd promoted her twice in those 3 years. How long? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. 8 months. She had the audacity to look irritated, as if my questions were an inconvenience. "Look, I didn't plan this. It just happened. We have a connection that's different. Real. Unlike what we had. Unlike the life we'd built together." "Were you ever going to tell me if I hadn't planned this dinner?" I asked, gesturing to the meal growing cold between us. The unlit candles, the small velvet box burning a hole in my pocket. The ring I'd saved for months to buy. She had the grace to look down then. "I was waiting for the right time. You've been so stressed with work lately." A bitter laugh escaped me. "So thoughtful of you." "I'm moving out tomorrow," she continued as if she hadn't heard me. "James found me an apartment closer to the office. I've already packed most of my things while you were at work. While I was at work. Putting in overtime to save for our future. For the ring in my pocket and the life I thought we were building. 5 years, I whispered. 5 years, Vanessa." She stood up, smoothing her dress, the one I'd bought her for her birthday. "I'm sorry it ended this way, but it's better to be honest now than to keep living a lie." Honest. After 5 years of deception, she wanted credit for honesty. I watched in stunned silence as she walked out of the dining room. Minutes later, I heard her in our bedroom. No, my bedroom now, gathering the last of her overnight things. I remained frozen at the table, unable to process what had just happened. When she returned, bag in hand, I still hadn't moved. "I'll come back for the rest when you're at work tomorrow," she said, pausing at the doorway. "I think that would be easier for both of us." I finally looked up at her. "Did I ever mean anything to you? Was any of it real?" For a moment, something like regret crossed her face. But then she squared her shoulders. "You're a good person, Alex. You'll find someone who can love you the way you deserve." Not an answer to my question. Never an answer. "Goodbye," she said, and then she was gone. The door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded more final than a slam would have. I sat there for hours. The food grew cold. The wine warmed. The music playlist looped back to the beginning, then played through again. Outside, night fell completely, and still I sat. The small velvet box now on the table before me, open to reveal the diamond ring that would never grace her finger. 5 years, gone in 4 words. "I never loved you." The days that followed passed in a blur. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done before. I couldn't face people, couldn't bear the thought of small talk and spreadsheets while my entire life lay in ruins around me. I barely ate, barely slept. When I did sleep, I kept reaching for her in the night, only to wake to cold, empty sheets. Her things disappeared gradually. True to her word, she came while I was out. Not at work, but walking aimlessly through the city, trying to outpace my thoughts. Each day, more of her vanished from the apartment. The expensive face creams from the bathroom, the books from the shelves, the artwork she'd chosen for our walls, leaving behind ghostly rectangles of unfaded paint. By the end of the week, it was as if Vanessa had never lived here at all, except for the memories. Those remained haunting every corner. I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the spot where she leaned against the counter each morning, coffee mug in hand, telling me about her plans for the day. I sat on the couch where we'd curled up for movie nights, her head on my shoulder, laughing at the same scenes every time. I lay in the bed where we'd made love countless times, all while she apparently felt nothing. I never loved you. The words played on repeat in my mind, a poisonous mantra that infected every memory, casting doubt on every moment we'd shared. Had she been faking it all? Every smile, every kiss, every whispered, "I love you"? On the seventh day, my phone rang. It was Mike, my best friend since college, the one who had introduced me to Vanessa at his birthday party 5 years ago. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and again. On the fourth attempt, I finally answered. "Jesus, Alex, I was about to call the police," he said, relief evident in his voice. "No one's heard from you in a week." "I'm fine," I lied, my voice raspy from disuse. "Like hell you are. I'm coming over." I didn't have the energy to argue. 30 minutes later, Mike was at my door, taking in my unwashed appearance, the empty takeout containers, the general disarray of the apartment. "Holy shit," he muttered, pushing past me. "What happened?" Vanessa left. Even saying her name felt like pressing on a bruise. Mike froze. "What? When?" "Last week. Our anniversary." I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. "She's been seeing her boss. For 8 months. That bastard from Meridian? James something?" Mike's face darkened with anger. At least someone was feeling what I should be feeling. All I felt was hollow. "James," I confirmed. "She said..." My voice caught. "She said she never loved me." Mike's expression shifted from anger to shock, then to something like pity. I couldn't stand it. "Don't," I warned him. "Don't look at me like that." He looked away, surveyed the apartment instead. "This place is a disaster. When's the last time you ate something that didn't come in a cardboard box?" I shrugged. "Right," he said decisively. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take a shower while I clean up this mess. Then we're going to get some real food in you, and you're going to tell me everything." I wanted to argue, to tell him to leave me alone. But the truth was, his presence was the first thing that had cut through the fog of my despair and daze. "Fine," I said. The hot water of the shower helped, washing away days of grief, sweat, and lethargy. I stood under the spray until it ran cold, then dressed in clean clothes for the first time in a week. When I emerged, the apartment was transformed. The takeout containers were gone, the dishes washed, the blinds open to let in the afternoon sun. Mike had also ordered food, real food, from that Italian place down the street that Vanessa and I used to. Number 1 near was. I couldn't keep doing that. Couldn't keep seeing her in everything. We ate in relative silence, Mike watching me carefully as if I might shatter. Only when I'd finished most of my meal did he speak. "Tell me what happened." So I did. I told him about the anniversary dinner, the revelation, the breakup. I told him about the ring still sitting in its box on my dresser. I told him about the emptiness that had taken up residence in my chest, expanding with each breath until I felt I might disappear entirely. "She's a fucking idiot," Mike said when I finished. "And he's a predatory asshole dating an employee. Isn't that against company policy or something?" I hadn't even thought about that. Probably. But it doesn't matter. They're together now. "It matters if you want to make trouble for them," Mike said, a hint of viciousness in his tone. Anonymous tip to HR... No, I shook my head. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to do anything that keeps her in my life, even indirectly. Mike studied me. "So what's your plan? Waste away in this apartment forever?" "I don't have a plan," I admitted. "I can barely think past the next hour. You need to get back to work. Get back to your life. Show her you're not broken." But I was broken. That was the problem. Vanessa had taken a wrecking ball to the foundation of my existence, and I had no idea how to start rebuilding. "I don't think I can face people yet," I said quietly. Mike's expression softened. "Take another week if you need to, but then you have to rejoin the world, Alex. You can't let her win like this." Win. As if this were a game. As if there were any scenario where I didn't lose everything. "I'll try," I promised, though the words felt empty. After Mike left, extracting a promise that I would answer my phone the next time he called, I stood at the window of my apartment, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was starting her new life. With James. In an apartment he'd found for her, probably celebrating her freedom from the relationship she'd never wanted. I never loved you. For the first time since she'd left, I felt something other than numbness and despair. A small spark of anger ignited in my chest. How dare she? How dare she waste 5 years of my life? How dare she let me believe we had a future when she'd apparently been counting the days until she could escape? The anger felt good, better than the emptiness. I clung to it, let it warm me from the inside out. By the time I went to bed that night, the spark had grown into a small flame. Not enough to burn away the pain, but enough to keep me from drowning in it. I returned to work the following Monday, 11 days after Vanessa walked out. My colleagues were careful around me, offering sympathetic smiles but asking no questions. Mike must have spread the word. I was grateful for that small mercy. My job at Reynolds Investment Group wasn't particularly exciting, but I was good at it. I had an eye for patterns, for potential, for the small details that others missed. It was why I'd risen quickly from analyst to senior portfolio manager in just 6 years. It was also why I'd been able to save enough for the ring now gathering dust in my dresser drawer. As I settled back into my work routine, I found that focusing on numbers and projections gave my mind a break from the constant replay of Vanessa's words. For a few hours each day, I could almost pretend that my life hadn't imploded. Almost. But evenings were still torture. Coming home to the empty apartment, cooking for one, sleeping alone in a bed that felt too large. I started working late, then later still. Anything to postpone the moment when I had to face the silence of my new reality. 3 weeks after she left, I was at the office well past midnight, poring over reports on emerging tech companies, when I came across a familiar name, Meridian Financial, Vanessa's company, James's company. I shouldn't have clicked on it, should have passed it by. But something compelled me to open the file. Meridian was privately held, owned by a trio of partners who'd founded it 20 years ago. They specialized in wealth management for high net worth individuals, a growing field but a competitive one. What caught my eye, however, was a note about their financial status. They were over-leveraged, having expanded too quickly over the past 2 years. New offices in 3 cities, aggressive hiring of top talent with inflated salaries, the expensive marketing campaigns, all while their client acquisition hadn't kept pace with their spending. In other words, they were vulnerable. I stared at the screen, a strange feeling washing over me. Not quite excitement, not quite vengeance. Something in between. A cold, calculating interest that felt entirely new. What if number Oshawur Dena Wana Inimemash? The thought that flickered through my mind was absurd, impossible. And yet, I spent the next hour digging deeper into Meridian's financials, calling up every report, every analysis our firm had produced on them. The picture that emerged confirmed my initial impression. They weren't in immediate danger, but they were stretched thin. One major market downturn, one significant loss of clients, and they could find themselves in serious trouble. The flame of anger that had been smoldering in my chest for weeks suddenly roared to life, transformed into something more focused, more purposeful. A plan, wild and implausible, but a plan nonetheless, began to take shape in my mind. What if I could take from Vanessa and James what they had taken from me? My security, my future, my sense of control over my own life. What if I could buy Meridian Financial? The idea was ludicrous. I was well paid, but nowhere near wealthy enough to purchase a company outright. And yet, as the idea took hold, I couldn't shake it loose. There had to be a way. Leverage buyouts happened all the time. Hostile takeovers, strategic acquisitions. I worked in finance. I understood the mechanisms, even if I'd never personally been involved in anything of that scale. For the first time since Vanessa had walked out of my life, I felt a glimmer of something like purpose, like hope, twisted and dark though it might be. I closed the files and shut down my computer, my mind racing. This wasn't just a passing fancy. This was something I could actually pursue, would pursue. Because if there was one thing Vanessa had taught me, it was that love was a lie. But power was real. And if I could gain power over the company she and her lover depended on for their livelihoods, for their relationship, for their future, well, that would be a revenge worth the pain she'd caused. I left the office with a strange sense of lightness. The pain was still there. It might always be there. But now it had a purpose, a direction, a target. Vanessa had told me she never loved me. Fine. I would show her exactly what that confession had unleashed. The next morning, I arrived at work with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. My appearance reflected the change. I'd actually taken care in choosing my suit, had trimmed the beard I'd let grow wild during my worst days. My colleagues noticed, offering smiles that held more relief than sympathy now. "You're looking better," Mike commented when he stopped by my office. "Finally sleeping again?" "Something like that," I replied, not ready to share my nascent plan. It was too fragile, too easily dismissed as the desperate fantasy of a jilted lover. "We should grab drinks after work," he suggested. "Get you back into the world. Maybe meet some new people." The old Alex would have refused, would have retreated back into grief and isolation. But the new Alex, the one born from Vanessa's cruel honesty, recognized the value in appearing normal, in letting people believe I was moving on. "Sure," I agreed. "First round's on you, though." Mike's surprise was almost comical. "Wow. Okay, deal. Barton's at 7? I'll be there." Once he left, I turned back to my computer. I had legitimate work to do, clients whose portfolios needed attention. But during every break, every lull, I returned to my research on Meridian Financial. By lunchtime, I had a clearer picture of their situation. They weren't publicly traded, which complicated matters, but also presented certain opportunities. Their 3 founding partners, James Sullivan, Vanessa's boss and new lover, Richard Barton, and Michael Chen, owned equal shares. According to industry gossip, tensions had been growing between Sullivan and the other two over the company's expansion strategy. Sullivan wanted aggressive growth, had pushed for the new offices, the high-profile hires. Barton and Chen had agreed, but reluctantly, and now that the strategy wasn't paying off as quickly as hoped, the cracks in their partnership were widening. If I could somehow exploit those cracks, I spent my lunch hour in the company library, poring over business journals and financial newspapers, seeking any mention of Meridian or its partners. A profile of Richard Barton caught my attention. At 62, he was the oldest of the 3 founders, and according to the article, had been making noises about retirement. His wife had health issues, and he wanted to spend more time with her at their home in Arizona. But with Meridian in its current state, Barton couldn't easily cash out his share without potentially destabilizing the company. He was trapped by the very growth that Sullivan had championed. I made a note of that. A potential pressure point. Michael Chen was more of an enigma. There was less written about him, but what I could find suggested he was the technical genius of the trio, the one who had developed their proprietary investment algorithms and client management systems. He was also, according to a brief mention in a tech magazine, increasingly interested in AI and blockchain technologies, areas that Meridian had been slow to explore. Another point of tension, perhaps. By the end of the day, I'd compiled enough research to understand that Meridian, for all its outward success, was ripe for disruption. But I was still no closer to figuring out how I, a moderately successful portfolio manager with good but not extraordinary savings, could possibly position myself to acquire such a company. The answer came to me that evening as I sat at Barton's with Mike, nursing a scotch and half listening to his stories about his latest dating disasters. And then she tells me she's actually a professional psychic, Mike was saying, and that she's sensing I have unresolved issues with my mother. Which fair, who doesn't? But not exactly first date conversation, you know? I nodded absently, my mind still turning over the Meridian problem. Earth to Alex. Mike waved his hand in front of my face. "Are you even listening?" "Professional psychic," I repeated. "Mother issues." "I heard you." He studied me. "Your body's here, but your mind is somewhere else entirely." "Mama said, what's going on?" I almost brushed him off, but then reconsidered. Mike worked in venture capital. He understood financing, deals, acquisitions. Maybe he could help if I framed it correctly. "I'm thinking about making a change," I said carefully. "Career-wise." Mike raised an eyebrow. "Like what? Different firm? Different sector? Different role entirely?" "I'm thinking about the acquisition side of things." "You want to be a buyer?" He looked surprised. "Since when?" "Since I realized that managing other people's money isn't as satisfying as it used to be. I want to build something of my own." It wasn't entirely a lie. The thought of controlling my own destiny, of building something that was mine alone, that had become increasingly appealing in the wake of Vanessa's betrayal. Mike took a sip of his beer, considering. "It's a big leap from portfolio management to acquisitions. You'd need capital, connections, a team." "I know," I acknowledged. "I'm still in the research phase." "Any particular industry you're looking at?" I hesitated. "Financial services, possibly. It's what I know." He nodded slowly. Makes sense. Start with what you understand. He paused. This doesn't have anything to do with Vanessa, does it? I kept my expression neutral. Why would it? I don't know. Sudden career change right after a breakup. Classic reaction. New job, new haircut, new life. I haven't changed my haircut, I pointed out. You know what I mean? I did know. And he wasn't entirely wrong. But this wasn't a random impulse. A desperate attempt to reinvent myself after heartbreak. This was calculated. Purposeful. It's not about Vanessa, I lied smoothly. It's about me figuring out what I want for the next phase of my life. Mike seemed to accept that. Well, if you're serious, I might be able to help. The firm I'm with now, we sometimes partner with individuals on acquisition deals. Usually industry veterans looking to take over struggling companies in their sector. If you found the right target, had a solid plan. And there it was. The missing piece. I didn't need to have all the capital myself. I could partner with a firm like Mike's, leverage their resources, their expertise. I'd appreciate any advice you could give. I said, careful not to sound too eager. Maybe we could grab lunch next week, talk about it more. Sure, he agreed easily. But Alex, take your time with this. Major life decisions right after a breakup can be risky. I'm not jumping into anything, I assured him. Like I said, I'm still in the research phase. But as we finished our drinks and parted ways, I knew I was well beyond research. I was committed now. The path forward was becoming clearer with each passing day. Meridian Financial, the company that had given James Sullivan the position and power to steal Vanessa from me. The company that now employed them both, supporting their new life together. It would become mine. And when it did, they would learn exactly what it felt like to have everything you depend on controlled by someone who wished you nothing but ill. I hailed a cab home, my mind buzzing with possibilities. For the first time in weeks, I didn't dread returning to my empty apartment. I had work to do, plans to make, a future to engineer, not the one I'd envisioned with Vanessa, but perhaps one even more satisfying in its own cold way. The game had begun. The next few weeks passed in a blur of focused activity. By day, I performed my regular duties at Reynolds with renewed vigor, impressing my supervisors with my dedication and insight. By night, I immersed myself in research on corporate acquisitions, leverage buyouts, and most importantly, Meridian Financial. I set up a dedicated workspace in my second bedroom, the one Vanessa and I had once talked about turning into a nursery someday. The irony wasn't lost on me as I pinned financial reports to the walls, created spreadsheets of potential allies and obstacles, and mapped out possible approaches to my target. My lunch with Mike proved invaluable. Without revealing my specific interest in Meridian, I picked his brain about the mechanics of partnering with venture capital for acquisitions. He was surprisingly forthcoming, perhaps because he thought my interest was purely theoretical, a way to distract myself from heartbreak. The key is to bring something unique to the table, he explained as we shared a plate of calamari. VC firms can provide capital, but they want partners who offer industry expertise, personal connections, or insight that gives them an edge. And if the target company isn't public? I asked. How does that change the approach? Makes it both harder and easier, he said. Harder because you can't just buy shares on the open market. You have to convince the current owners to sell. Easier because you don't have to deal with public disclosure requirements, shareholder votes, all that regulation. So it becomes more personal, I mused. More about relationships. Exactly. You need to understand what motivates the current owners. Money is usually part of it, but not always the main driver. Sometimes it's legacy concerns, or wanting to step back without letting the company fail, or conflicts between partners that make selling an attractive escape hatch. Conflicts between partners, like the ones I'd identified at Meridian. That makes sense, I said, filing away the information. Mike studied me over his water glass. You're really serious about this, aren't you? It's not just talk. I met his gaze steadily. I am. I need something to focus on, something that's entirely mine. After Vanessa, I let my voice trail off, allowing him to fill in the blanks with his own assumptions. Let him think this was about healing, about moving on. In a way, perhaps it was, just not in the way he imagined. Well, when you're ready to get serious, let me know, he said. My firm is always looking for promising partnerships. If you found the right target, something in your wheelhouse where you could add real value, we might be interested. I appreciate that, I said, meaning it. Mike had just handed me another piece of the puzzle. As the days passed, I refined my understanding of Meridian's vulnerabilities, their over-leveraged position, the tension between the partners. the strategic mistakes they'd made in their expansion. But I also needed information from the inside, details that wouldn't appear in any public record or industry gossip. For that, I would need to develop sources within Meridian itself. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. At a finance industry networking event, one I would normally have skipped but now attended with purpose, I encountered Diane Zhang, a financial analyst I'd worked with briefly years ago. She now worked at Meridian. "Alex," she greeted me warmly. "It's been ages." "Hachanin. How are you?" "Never better," I lied with a smile. "How about you? Still at Meridian, right?" Her expression flickered briefly. "Yes, though. Never mind. It's good to see you." I caught the hesitation. "Everything okay there?" "I've heard rumors about rapid expansion causing some growing pains." Diane glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Between us, it's a mess. The partners are barely speaking to each other. Middle management is jumping ship, and the new offices are hemorrhaging money." "Sounds stressful." I sympathized, hiding my internal surge of satisfaction. "I thought James Sullivan was supposed to be some kind of visionary." She rolled her eyes. "James is all flash, no substance. He talks a good game, but his strategy is failing. And now he's distracted by his new girlfriend, some junior account manager he promoted twice in 3 years. The office gossip is brutal. Vanessa." She was talking about Vanessa. I kept my expression neutral, even as my heart raced. "Office romances rarely end well," I said mildly. "Especially when there are obvious conflicts of interest," Diane agreed. "But no one can say anything because James is untouchable. Or was until recently." "Oh," I tried to sound only politely interested. "Barton and Chen are pushing back now. Word is they're exploring options to either force James out or sell their stakes entirely." She shook her head. "I should probably dust off my resume. When partners start fighting, employees get caught in the crossfire. If you're ever looking to make a move, let me know," I offered. "Reynolds is always searching for talent." "I might take you up on that," she said with a grateful smile. "Anyway, enough work talk at a party. How's your love life? Still with that beautiful woman from the holiday party last year?" The question was like a knife to the gut, but I didn't let it show. "We went our separate ways recently. Mutual decision. Better for both of us." Another lie, but a necessary one. I couldn't risk word getting back to Vanessa that I was still devastated. Still planning revenge. "I'm sorry to hear that," Diane said, genuinely sympathetic. "But you know what they say. Plenty of fish in the sea, especially for a catch like you." I managed a self-deprecating laugh. "And we'll see. I'm focusing on work right now. Speaking of which, we should grab coffee sometime. Catch up properly." "I'd like that," she said, reaching into her purse for a business card. "Here. Could call me." I took the card, already calculating how I could leverage this new connection. Diane could be an invaluable source of inside information on Meridian's operations, the partners' movements, and most importantly, Vanessa and James's positions within the company. By the time I left the networking event, I had 3 more business cards from Meridian employees, a junior partner in their wealth management division, an IT specialist, and a marketing director. Each potential source had revealed snippets of information that confirmed my assessment. Meridian was ripe for the picking. That night, I added their names to my growing chart on the wall of what I now thought of as my war room. Connections, leverage points, potential allies. The picture was becoming clearer. The path to acquiring Meridian would be complex, but not impossible. I just needed capital, a lot of it. My own savings were substantial for a man my age, nearly $800,000 between various accounts, but nowhere near enough to make a play for a company of Meridian's size. Even with backing from a venture capital firm like Mike's, I would need to bring more to the table. The answer came to me as I was reviewing my own client list at Reynolds. Among them was Eleanor Whitman, an elderly widow who had inherited a chemical manufacturing company from her husband 5 years ago. She had no interest in running it herself, but had kept it for sentimental reasons. Recently, though, she had mentioned considering selling, as the management team was pushing for changes she didn't understand or trust. I pulled up her file. The company, Whitman Chemical Solutions, was conservatively valued at $30 million. Not huge by industry standards, but solid, profitable, with minimal debt. What if? The idea that formed was audacious, perhaps even reckless. But the more I considered it, the more viable it seemed. If I could help Eleanor sell her company for a premium, and in the process position myself as part of the deal, perhaps as a condition of the sale, ensuring continued employment for key staff, I could potentially leverage that into my next move. It would require careful handling, absolute discretion, and no small amount of ethical flexibility. But ethics seemed a luxury I could no longer afford, not after what Vanessa had done. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Mike's number. It was late, but I knew he'd still be awake. "Alex?" He answered, sounds of a bar in the background. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I assured him. "But I think I'm ready to have that conversation about acquisition partnerships. There's an opportunity I'd like to discuss." "Now we're talking," Mike said, his interest clearly piqued. "You have a target in mind?" "I do, but not over the phone. Can we meet tomorrow?" "Somewhere private." "Intriguing," he replied. "My office, noon? I'll clear my schedule." "Perfect. And Mike?" "This stays between us for now." "Of course. Client confidentiality is sacred in my business." He paused. "This is moving fast, Alex. You sure you're ready?" "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I told him, and for the first time in weeks, I spoke the absolute truth. Mike's office at Quantum Venture Partners occupied half a floor in a sleek downtown tower. The reception area screamed money and sophistication, all glass, chrome, and abstract art that probably cost more than my annual salary. The receptionist, a poised young woman with an immaculate blowout, greeted me by name before I could introduce myself. "Mr. Reynolds is expecting you, Mr. Carter. Right this way." I followed her through the open workspace where analysts huddled over multi-screen setups, past conference rooms where animated discussions were taking place, and finally to Mike's corner office with its panoramic views of the city. Mike greeted me with a handshake and a curious expression. You're looking determined." "I am," I confirmed, taking the seat he offered. "Thanks for meeting on short notice. When you called last night, you sounded like a man with a plan." "I'm intrigued." He leaned back in his ergonomic chair. "So, what's this opportunity you wanted to discuss?" I opened my briefcase and removed a folder containing the materials I'd prepared until 3 a.m. "Are you familiar with Whitman Chemical Solutions?" He frowned slightly. "Mid-sized specialty chemical manufacturer. Family-owned until the founder died a few years ago. Widow runs it now, if I recall correctly." "That's the one." Eleanor Whitman inherited it when her husband died. "She's been a client of mine at Reynolds for years." I slid the folder across the desk. "She's looking to sell." Mike raised an eyebrow as he opened the folder. "And how do you know this isn't already common knowledge in the market?" "Because she's only discussed it with me, and she's asked for my help in finding the right buyer. One who will respect her husband's legacy and keep the current management team intact." He flipped through the financial statements I'd included. Numbers look solid. Conservative growth, strong margins, minimal debt. But specialty chemicals isn't exactly a hot sector right now. "That's why it's undervalued," I countered. "The right buyer could modernize operations, expand their product line into emerging green chemistry areas, and potentially double revenues within 5 years." Mike looked up from the papers. "And you know all this how, exactly?" "You're a portfolio manager, not a chemical industry expert." "I've been managing Eleanor's portfolio, including the company financials, for 4 years. I've sat in on board meetings as her representative. I know this company inside and out." Not entirely true, but close enough. I had reviewed the financials quarterly and attended a few meetings, enough to understand the basics of the operation. "Okay," Mike said slowly. "So you have inside information on a potential acquisition target. That's valuable, but I'm still not seeing why Quantum should get involved, or what you get out of this beyond a likely very generous finder's fee from Mrs. Whitman." This was the moment, the pivot that would set everything else in motion. "I don't want a finder's fee," I said. "I want a position in the acquired company, chief operating officer or chief financial officer, with a significant equity stake. And I want Quantum's help in using that position and equity as leverage for my next move." Mike's expression changed from mild interest to intense focus. "Your next move being?" "Meridian Financial." There, it was out. I watched his face carefully, saw the moment of surprise followed by calculation. "Meridian," he repeated. "James Sullivan's company, where Vanessa works." So he had made the connection immediately. No point denying it now. "Yes." Mike leaned forward. "Alex, I appreciate your ambition, but if this is about getting back at your ex..." "It's not just about that," I interrupted. "Meridian is vulnerable. Over-leveraged internal partner conflicts, strategic missteps in their expansion. It's a textbook acquisition target, regardless of my personal connection." "But the personal connection is a factor," he pressed. I met his gaze steadily. "Would you pass on a profitable opportunity just because it happened to involve someone who wronged you?" That depends on whether the personal element would cloud my judgment or enhance my commitment. Fair point. I nodded. It enhances it. I've done more research on Meridian in the past month than most people would do in a year. I know their strengths, their weaknesses, their internal dynamics. And yes, I have additional motivation to succeed. Is that really a negative? Mike sat back, studying me as if seeing me for the first time. You've changed. Yes, I acknowledged. I have. And this plan of yours, use the Whitman acquisition to establish yourself as a player, then leverage that into a run at Meridian? You've thought it through? I slid another folder across the desk. Timeline, financing options, potential partners and obstacles, preliminary valuation analysis. It's all there. He opened the second folder, his eyebrows rising as he scanned the contents. This is thorough. I don't do things halfway. Clearly not. He continued reading, occasionally making small sounds of surprise or approval. When he finally looked up, his expression was thoughtful. You know, when you called last night, I thought this might be some half-baked revenge fantasy. But this, he tapped the folder, this is actually solid. Ambitious as hell, but solid. Then you'll help? I'll present it to our acquisition team, he said carefully. Whitman Chemical is definitely an interesting opportunity. As for the Meridian angle, he hesitated. Let's take this one step at a time. If the Whitman deal goes through and you prove yourself in an operational role there, then we can discuss phase 2. It wasn't an outright yes, but it was enough to move forward. That's all I'm asking for now. I should warn you though, Mike added, this kind of corporate maneuvering, it changes people. I've seen it before. The Alex I know has always been straightforward, honest. This path requires a different set of skills, a different mindset. I'm already changed, I said simply. Vanessa saw to that. That's what worries me, he admitted. Revenge is a powerful motivator, but it's not always a constructive one. This isn't just about revenge. I insisted, though we both knew that was at least partially a lie. It's about taking control of my life, building something meaningful, proving to myself that I can. Mike nodded slowly. All right, I'll present the Whitman opportunity to our team tomorrow. If they're interested, we'll want to meet with Eleanor directly. Can you arrange that? Of course. And Alex? He held my gaze. Once we start down this road, there's no turning back. Are you absolutely sure this is what you want? I thought of Vanessa in James's arms. Thought of her cold eyes as she told me she'd never loved me. Thought of 5 years of my life rendered meaningless by her deception. I'm sure, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. This is exactly what I want. Eleanor Whitman lived in a stately Tudor home in the most exclusive neighborhood of the city. At 74, she retained the sharp mind and dignified bearing that had intimidated me when we first met 4 years ago. Now, as her financial advisor, I was one of the few people she genuinely trusted. I'd called her immediately after leaving Mike's office, requesting an urgent meeting about a significant opportunity regarding her company. She'd agreed to see me that afternoon. Her housekeeper showed me into the formal living room, where Eleanor sat with perfect posture on an antique settee, a cup of tea in her fine-boned hand. Alexander, she greeted me, using my full name as she always did. This must be important for you to request such an immediate meeting. It is, Mrs. Whitman, I confirmed, taking the seat she indicated. Thank you for accommodating me on short notice. She waved away my thanks. You've earned some accommodation. Your management of my portfolio has been excellent, particularly in these uncertain times. She set down her teacup. Now, what is this opportunity you mentioned? I'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times, knowing that Eleanor valued directness but also appreciated tact. I believe I've found the ideal buyer for Whitman Chemical Solutions, I said without preamble. She stilled, her only reaction a slight narrowing of her eyes. I don't recall saying I was ready to sell my husband's company. 3 months ago, during our quarterly review, you mentioned that the board was pushing for changes you weren't comfortable with. I reminded her gently. You asked me to discreetly explore options, including potential buyers who would respect George's legacy. She inclined her head, acknowledging the truth of my words. I did say that. I didn't expect you to move quite so quickly. The opportunity presented itself sooner than anticipated. I explained. A venture capital firm I have connections with is looking to diversify into established manufacturing businesses with growth potential. Whitman Chemical fits their criteria perfectly. And what do they intend to do with George's company? Her voice carried a note of protectiveness. That's the most promising aspect, I said, leaning forward slightly. They want to maintain the current operations while gradually expanding into green chemistry applications, something George himself was interested in toward the end, if I recall correctly. Eleanor's expression softened at the mention of her late husband's interests. He was indeed. He believed sustainable chemistry was the future, though the board thought it too speculative at the time. This firm shares that vision. I continued. More importantly, they're committed to retaining the current management team and preserving the Whitman name and legacy. These assurances sound promising, but venture capitalists are not known for sentiment. They buy companies to maximize profit, often at the expense of everything else, which is why I've negotiated a condition, I said, playing my carefully prepared card. As part of the deal, I would take a position within the company, Chief Operating Officer, to ensure that these commitments are honored. I would be your eyes and ears, Eleanor. Your husband's legacy would be my direct responsibility. She studied me with shrewd eyes. That's an interesting condition, one that benefits you considerably. I met her gaze steadily. It benefits us both. You get the security of knowing someone you trust is protecting George's legacy, and I get an opportunity to expand my career beyond portfolio management. And your current position at Reynolds? I would leave it, with appropriate notice and transition arrangements for my clients, of course. Eleanor picked up her teacup again, taking a small sip as she considered my proposal. This is all very sudden, Alexander. I need to know what prompted this. Career change. I had anticipated this question. With Eleanor, partial honesty would serve better than complete deception. My personal circumstances have changed recently, I said carefully. A long-term relationship ended, rather painfully. It made me reassess what I want from my life, my career. Ah, she said with the knowing look of someone who has experienced far more of life's complications than I had. Heartbreak as catalyst, a tale as old as time. Something like that, I acknowledged. And the name of this venture capital firm? Quantum Venture Partners. Their managing director, Michael Reynolds, is prepared to meet with you at your convenience to discuss their offer. Michael Reynolds, she repeated. Any relation to your firm? No relation, just coincidence. I paused. Their initial valuation range is between 35 and 40 million, pending due diligence. Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. The range was a good 20% above market value, as we both knew. They must want it quite badly at that price. They recognize its potential, I said simply, especially with the proprietary formulations Whitman holds patents on. She set down her cup with a decisive clink. Arrange the meeting, Alexander. I make no promises, but I'm willing to hear what your Mr. Reynolds has to say. Thank you, Eleanor. I think you'll find their approach refreshing. They understand the value of what George built. She gave me a long, contemplative look. This heartbreak of yours, it has changed you. There's a hardness about you now that wasn't there before. I didn't deny it. Life changes us all in ways we don't expect. Indeed it does. She rose, signaling the end of our meeting. Just be careful that in pursuing this new direction, you don't lose the qualities that have made you so effective in your current role. Integrity chief among them. Her words struck uncomfortably close to concerns I'd been suppressing. Was I compromising my integrity, using Eleanor's trust for my own purposes? But then I remembered Vanessa's cold eyes, remembered the casual ways she discarded 5 years of my life, my love, my trust. I appreciate your concern, I said as I stood. Rest assured I'll always be honest with you. If she noted the careful phrasing, honest with her, if not necessarily about my ultimate motivations, she gave no sign of it. Arrange the meeting for next week, she instructed. Morning, if possible. I'm sharper then. Of course. As the housekeeper showed me out, I felt a mixture of triumph and unease. Phase 1 of my plan was proceeding even more smoothly than I'd anticipated. Eleanor's willingness to meet with Quantum was a significant first step, but her parting words lingered. Integrity. Once I would have considered it my defining quality, now it seemed like a luxury I could no longer afford. Not if I wanted to claim the power necessary to even the score with Vanessa and James. I checked my phone as I reached my car. A text from Mike. Team is interested. How did it go with the widow? I typed back, meeting set for next week. She's receptive but cautious. His response came quickly. Perfect. We'll be ready. Dinner tonight to discuss strategy? Can't tonight, I replied. Have plans. Those plans involved meeting Diane Zhang for drinks, a casual setting where I could extract more information about Meridian's current situation without raising suspicions. Each piece of intelligence was another weapon in my growing arsenal. As I drove away from Eleanor's stately home, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. Eleanor was right. There was a hardness to my expression now, a coldness in my eyes that hadn't been there before Vanessa's betrayal. I didn't regret it. That hardness was protection. That coldness was purpose. And both would serve me well in the months ahead. The meeting between Eleanor and the Quantum team went even better than I'd hoped. Mike brought their chief financial officer and head of acquisitions, both of whom struck the perfect balance between respectful of Eleanor's concerns and confident in their vision for Whitman Chemical's future. Eleanor, for her part, asked incisive questions about their plans, their financing, and most importantly, their commitment to maintaining her husband's legacy. When she brought up my proposed role as COO, Mike supported it enthusiastically, describing it as essential to ensuring continuity and trust. Alexander knows both your priorities and the company's operations, he told her. Having him in a leadership position creates a bridge between Whitman's past and its future. By the end of the meeting, Eleanor had agreed to move forward with preliminary due diligence, the first formal step toward a sale. As we walked the Quantum team out, she squeezed my arm lightly. "You've chosen good partners, Alexander," she said. "I trust your judgment in this matter." The words should have filled me with pride. Instead, I felt a twinge of guilt at using her trust as a stepping stone toward my true goal. But I pushed the feeling aside. There was no room for guilt in this new version of myself. Over the next 6 weeks, the Whitman acquisition progressed with remarkable speed. The due diligence confirmed what we already knew. The company was solid, profitable, and undervalued. Quantum's offer of $38 million was formally presented, and after some negotiation about specific terms, accepted by Eleanor and the board. Throughout the process, I continued my day job at Reynolds while simultaneously laying groundwork for my next moves. My drinks with Diane Zhang had evolved into a regular occurrence, yielding a wealth of information about Meridian's internal troubles. James Sullivan's expansion plans were faltering badly. The San Francisco office was underperforming, the Chicago location was struggling to attract clients, and the Atlanta office was bleeding money. More importantly, the rift between the partners had widened. Richard Barton had begun openly discussing retirement plans, while Michael Chen was increasingly focused on a side project developing investment algorithm software, a potential competitor to Meridian's core business. James was scrambling to hold it all together, while also managing his relationship with Vanessa, which had apparently become a subject of office gossip and resentment. "The junior staff hate her," Diane told me over martinis one evening. 2 promotions in 3 years, a corner office, and now she's untouchable because she's sleeping with the boss. It's like a bad corporate cliche. Has her work at least justified the promotions? I asked, keeping my tone merely curious. Diane snorted. "She's competent, I'll give her that. But not corner office competent. Not at her experience level." She sipped her drink. "The worst part is, James doesn't even try to hide the favoritism. In meetings, he'll defer to her over people with twice her experience. It's embarrassing." Each such detail was carefully filed away in my mental arsenal. Vanessa's position was precarious, dependent entirely on James's protection. If James were to lose power or influence. Meanwhile, I cultivated relationships with 2 other Meridian employees I'd met at industry events. From Bradley in IT, I learned about their outdated systems and security vulnerabilities. From Melissa in marketing, I gathered intelligence on their client acquisition challenges and brand perception issues. By the time the Whitman deal closed in early October, 3 months after Vanessa had walked out of my life, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Meridian's weaknesses, pressure points, and internal dynamics. I knew where they were vulnerable. I knew which partners might be receptive to an outside offer. And I knew exactly how I would position myself to make that offer. My last day at Reynolds was bittersweet. My colleagues organized a small going-away party, complete with cake and champagne. My boss gave a speech about my contributions and expressed confidence in my future success. Several clients sent emails expressing their regret at my departure. It all felt strangely distant, as if I were watching someone else's farewell. The Alex they were celebrating, the diligent, straightforward portfolio manager with an easy smile and a reputation for integrity, already felt like a stranger to me. The new Alex, harder, colder, more focused, was preparing to step into a position of real power for the first time. At 34, I would become the COO of a $38 million company. My compensation package included a base salary of $220,000 plus performance bonuses, and most importantly, a 5% equity stake in the acquired company. That equity stake was key to the next phase of my plan. 5% of $38 million was $1.9 million in paper value. Not cash I could access immediately, but a significant asset I could leverage. The day after my farewell party at Reynolds, I met Mike for lunch at an upscale restaurant near Quantum's offices. "To your new position," he said, raising his water glass in a toast. So Carter has a nice ring to it. I returned the gesture. Couldn't have happened without your help. True, he acknowledged with a grin. But you've held up your end. The Whitman deal was smooth sailing, largely because of your relationship with Eleanor. The board meeting is next Tuesday to formalize your appointment, but it's a formality at this point. I nodded, taking a sip of my water before broaching the subject we both knew was coming. And phase 2? Mike's expression grew more serious. I've presented the preliminary proposal to our acquisition committee. They're intrigued by the Meridian opportunity, especially given the intelligence you've gathered about their partner conflicts. And they want more concrete evidence that at least one of the partners is genuinely interested in selling before they commit resources to a formal approach. I'd anticipated this. I can get that evidence. How? Mike looked skeptical. Richard Barton, I said. He's the most likely seller. His wife's health is deteriorating, he wants to retire, and he's increasingly frustrated with James Sullivan's management decisions. I have a connection who can facilitate an introduction. What kind of connection? Diane Zhang, I said. She works directly with Barton on several key accounts. She's been helpful in providing information about Meridian's internal dynamics. Mike's eyebrows rose. You've been cultivating sources inside Meridian this whole time. Of course, I said simply. Did you think I was just speculating about their vulnerabilities? He studied me with newfound respect and perhaps a touch of wariness. You really have changed. I adapt to circumstances, I corrected. And the circumstances required better information than was publicly available. Fair enough, he leaned back. So what's your plan for approaching Barton? A private meeting arranged through Diane. Position it as a confidential discussion about potential investment opportunities. Nothing explicitly about acquiring Meridian. Once I have him one-on-one, I can assess his receptiveness to a more direct conversation. And if he's not receptive, then I try Chen next, I said. His passion is technology, not wealth management. From what I've gathered, he's got a side project developing algorithmic trading software that he's more interested in than Meridian's day-to-day operations. He might welcome an exit that would fund his true interests. Mike nodded slowly. You've thought this through. That's all I've been doing for months, I admitted. Every angle, every approach, every contingency. Because of Vanessa, he said, not a question but a statement. Because they took something from me, I corrected. And I intend to take something from them in return. You know, Mike said carefully, even if you succeed in acquiring Meridian, it won't heal what she broke. Revenge rarely provides the satisfaction people expect. This isn't just about satisfaction, I insisted. It's about power, about control. They took control of my life, my future. I'm taking it back. By controlling theirs, Mike observed. Precisely, he sighed. Just be careful not to lose yourself in this, Alex. I've seen acquisition battles turn ugly. People get hurt. Relationships get destroyed. I almost laughed at that. What relationships did I have left to destroy? Vanessa had seen to that. Even my friendship with Mike had transformed into something more transactional, more strategic. I appreciate your concern, I said, echoing the words I'd used with Eleanor. But I know what I'm doing. I hope so, he replied. Because once you start this in earnest, there's no going back. I don't want to go back, I said with absolute conviction. Only forward. My appointment as COO of Whitman Chemical Solutions was formalized the following Tuesday, as Mike had predicted. I spent the next 2 weeks immersing myself in the operations, meeting with department heads, reviewing processes, and establishing my authority within the organization. The existing management team was initially wary. I was, after all, the outsider brought in by the new owners. But my knowledge of the company financials and my clear mandate from Eleanor helped smooth the transition. I made a point of moving slowly, observing more than directing in those early days. It would have been a mistake to rush in with sweeping changes before I understood the operational realities. Besides, my true focus remained elsewhere. Whitman was a means to an end, a platform from which to launch my assault on Meridian. Through Diane, I arranged a private meeting with Richard Barton at an exclusive club where he was a member. The pretext was a discussion about potential personal investment opportunities, plausible given my background in wealth management. The real purpose was to assess his willingness to sell his stake in Meridian. The Harvard Club exuded old wealth and power, with its dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and discreet staff. Barton was waiting for me in a private corner of the reading room, nursing what appeared to be a Scotch neat. At 62, He had the polished appearance of a man who had spent decades in finance. Silver hair perfectly cut, navy suit impeccably tailored, Oxford shoes gleaming. "Mr. Carter," he greeted me, rising to shake my hand. "Diane speaks highly of your investment acumen." "Please call me Alex," I said, taking the seat opposite him. "And Diane is too kind. I simply try to match opportunities with the right investors." "A valuable skill," he acknowledged, gesturing to a server. "What can I get you to drink?" "Macallan 18 if they have it," I said, noting his approval of my choice. As the server departed to fetch my drink, Barton settled back in his chair. "Diane mentioned you recently made a significant career change. Chief Operating Officer of a specialty chemical manufacturer, is that right?" "Whitman Chemical Solutions," I confirmed. "An opportunity too good to pass up." "Quite a leap from portfolio management to operations," he observed. "A calculated risk," I replied. "The company has excellent fundamentals and significant growth potential in green chemistry applications. The previous ownership was conservative in their approach. And the new ownership? More vision, more appetite for strategic expansion." My drink arrived, and I took a small appreciative sip before continuing. "But I didn't request this meeting to discuss Whitman. I'm more interested in exploring potential synergies with firms like Meridian." Barton's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight narrowing of his eyes. "Synergies? Whitman has a number of high-net-worth clients from the manufacturing sector who could benefit from Meridian's wealth management expertise," I explained. "Conversely, I imagine Meridian has clients with interests in the chemical industry who might appreciate introductions to our R&D team for potential investments. A mutually beneficial arrangement," Barton mused, "though typically such referral relationships would be handled at a more administrative level." "Hakan and that true," I acknowledged. "But given the potential value, I wanted to explore the concept with a principal first, particularly one with your reputation for recognizing value where others might miss it." He took a sip of his scotch, studying me over the rim of his glass. "Flattery, Mr. Carter? Recognition of a fact," I countered smoothly. "Your track record speaks for itself." He set down his glass. "Let's be direct. Diane may have mentioned that I am occasionally open to private investment opportunities, but I suspect there's more to this meeting than a simple referral arrangement between our companies. I decided to take a calculated risk." "You're right. I've been following Meridian's expansion efforts with interest. 3 new offices in major markets. Ambitious. Too ambitious, some would say," Barton replied, a note of bitterness creeping into his voice. "Growth always involves risk," I said carefully. "Though I understand the Chicago and Atlanta locations have faced those challenges." Barton's eyes sharpened. "You seem remarkably well informed about our internal matters." I shrugged slightly. "The financial community talks. Successes and struggles alike become common knowledge eventually." "Indeed." He took another sip of his drink, then leaned forward slightly. "Why are you really here, Mr. Carter?" The moment of truth. I met his gaze steadily. "I represent interests that see significant potential in Meridian's business model and client base, despite the recent expansion challenges. These interests would be prepared to discuss a strategic acquisition should any of the current partners be considering exit options." There. The cards were on the table now. Barton could shut down the conversation, report back to his partners, potentially derail my entire plan. Or, "And these interests you represent," he said, his voice lowered, though no one was near enough to overhear, "they have the capital necessary for such an acquisition?" "They do," I confirmed, "with a particular focus on preserving the core wealth management business while potentially restructuring the recent expansions." Barton was silent for a long moment, turning his glass slowly on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was guarded but not dismissive. "I've been with Meridian from the beginning, 20 years of building something I believed in, something I was proud of. And you should be proud," I said. "The Meridian reputation for client service is exceptional." "It was," he corrected bitterly, "before James convinced us that growth at any cost was the only path forward. Before we took on debt we didn't need to open offices we weren't ready for." I remained silent, letting him continue. "My wife's condition is deteriorating," he said after another pause. "The doctors give her perhaps 2 years. I want those years with her in Arizona, not fighting daily battles in New York over decisions I warned against from the start." "Understandable," I said quietly. "Family comes first." "It should," he agreed. "But extracting myself from Meridian has proved complicated." The partnership agreement requires the other partners to approve any sale of shares, and at present, they're reluctant to do so, particularly James. Because your departure would signal problems to clients and competitors alike, I surmised. Precisely. Barton finished his scotch. So you see, Mr. Carter, while I might be receptive to the interests you represent, there are obstacles that can't be easily overcome. There are always solutions for those willing to think creatively, I countered. For instance, a phased approach, an initial minority investment that gives your partners time to adjust to the idea, followed by a complete acquisition once they see the benefits. He raised an eyebrow. You've given this some thought. It's what I do, I said simply. Identify opportunities, develop strategies to realize them. And what would your role be in this potential acquisition? Advisory initially, I said, with the possibility of a more direct role once the transaction is complete. Barton signaled for another drink. I would need to know more about these interests you represent before taking this conversation further. Of course, I agreed. Quantum Venture Partners is the primary capital source. They have a successful track record in financial services acquisitions, with a particular emphasis on preserving core business values while optimizing operations. Quantum, he repeated. I know them by reputation. Solid firm. They are, I confirmed, and they understand the value of discretion in matters like these. Barton was silent again, clearly weighing his options. I waited patiently, knowing that pushing now would be a mistake. My partners would resist, he finally said, particularly James. He's heavily invested in the current expansion strategy. Even if it's failing? I asked quietly. Barton's expression hardened, especially because it's failing. Admitting failure isn't in James Sullivan's vocabulary. I nodded, unsurprised. And the third partner? Chen? Michael is. Barton hesitated, distracted. He's developed a proprietary trading algorithm that's consuming most of his attention these days. Meridian's day-to-day operations interest him less and less, so potentially receptive to an exit opportunity that would fund his technology interests. I suggested. Potentially, Barton agreed, though he's loyal to James in his way. They've been friends since business school. Another piece of the puzzle. I filed it away. Would you be willing to have a more detailed conversation about what an acquisition might look like? With the understanding that it remains exploratory and confidential at this stage? Barton studied me for a long moment before answering. I would. But not here. Not anywhere that might raise questions if we were seen together. I understand completely, I assured him. I could arrange a meeting at Quantum's offices. Or anywhere else you'd prefer. There's a property my family owns in Connecticut, he said. A small vacation home we rarely use now, with Catherine's health issues. We could meet there this weekend. No staff, no observers, complete privacy. That sounds ideal, I agreed. Would Saturday morning work? Yes. I'll text you the address. He finished his second scotch. I should be clear, Mr. Carter. I'm not committing to anything at this point. Merely exploring options. Of course, I said smoothly. Exploration is all I'm proposing at this stage. As we parted ways a few minutes later, I felt a surge of triumph. Barton was receptive, more than receptive. He was actively seeking an exit. The first major piece of my plan was falling into place. I called Mike from the cab on my way back to my apartment. He's interested, I said without preamble. Barton? Mike sounded surprised. Already? We're meeting again this weekend to discuss details. He wants out, Mike. His wife is ill, he wants to retire to Arizona, and he's furious with Sullivan over the failed expansion. That's faster than expected, Mike admitted. Did you discuss valuation? Not yet. That's for the weekend meeting. I'll need you there, along with whoever handles financial modeling for these types of acquisitions at Quantum. I can bring Lisa Chen, our VP of Valuations, Mike said. She's the best we have for complex financial structures. He paused. Alex, you realize this is moving extremely quickly, right? Acquisitions like this typically take months just to get to the serious discussion stage. We don't have months, I countered. Barton is ready to move now. If we wait, circumstances could change. Sullivan might convince him to stay, or Chen might align more firmly with Sullivan. Fair point, Mike conceded. I'll brief Lisa, have her prepare some preliminary models based on the information we have. But Alex, what? This is about the business opportunity, right? Not just about getting to Vanessa and her boss? I hesitated, then decided on honesty. It's both. The opportunity is real. Meridian has a strong core business despite the expansion mistakes. But yes, the personal motivation is still there. Just making sure we're on the same page, Mike said. Quantum's in this for the return on investment, not the personal revenge angle. Understood, I assured him. The business case will be solid. I promise you that. After ending the call, I leaned back in the cab seat, watching the city pass by. Everything was moving faster than I dared hope. Within months, perhaps even weeks, I could be in position to take control of Meridian Financial, to take control of the company that employed James Sullivan and Vanessa Chen. The thought brought a cold smile to my face. Soon, very soon, they would understand what it felt like to have their professional lives, their futures, their security controlled by someone who wished them nothing but ill. I never loved you, Vanessa had said. Soon I would show her exactly what that confession had created. The meeting at Barton's Connecticut property exceeded my most optimistic expectations. The secluded house, set on several wooded acres, provided the perfect setting for our confidential discussions. Mike and Lisa joined me, bringing preliminary valuation models and acquisition structures for Barton's consideration. Richard welcomed us with the grave courtesy of a man about to make a life-altering decision. He had come alone, telling his partners he was spending the weekend visiting his wife at a treatment facility in Boston. I can't stay in the partnership, he told us as we sat in his comfortable but modest living room. Catherine needs me, and quite frankly, I've lost faith in the direction James is taking the company. Lisa, a sharp-minded woman in her 40s with a reputation for creative financial structures, nodded sympathetically. From the information we've gathered, the expansion seems to have stretched resources rather thin. That's an understatement, Barton said bitterly. We've taken on nearly $18 million in debt for offices that are nowhere near breaking even. James assured us they would be profitable within a year. We're now 18 months in, and all three are still operating at a loss. And cutting back isn't an option? Mike asked. Not according to James. He believes retreating would damage our brand beyond repair. So we keep pouring money into failing locations while our core business suffers from lack of attention. I leaned forward. And Chen? What's his position? Michael is, Barton paused, choosing his words carefully, divided. His heart isn't in the day-to-day business anymore. He's developed a trading algorithm that he believes could revolutionize the industry. But developing it further requires capital he doesn't have access to while his money is tied up in Meridian. So he might be receptive to an exit as well, I noted. Potentially? Barton agreed, though approaching him directly would be risky. As I mentioned, he and James go way back. What about your partnership agreement? Lisa asked. You mentioned constraints on selling your shares. Barton sighed. Any partner wishing to sell must first offer their shares to the other partners at fair market value. If they decline, the selling partner must obtain approval from the remaining partners for any outside sale, which James would certainly refuse. I concluded. Exactly. Barton looked frustrated. I'm effectively trapped. Lisa exchanged a glance with Mike before speaking. There might be a way around that. If we structured this as a loan secured by your shares, rather than an outright purchase. For the next 2 hours, we explored various approaches to extracting Barton from Meridian, while giving Quantum, and by extension, me, a foothold in the company. By mid-afternoon, we had outlined a workable strategy. Quantum would provide Barton with a $15 million loan, secured by his 1/3 stake in Meridian. The loan would be structured with minimal required payments for the first 2 years, allowing Barton to relocate to Arizona with his wife without immediate financial pressure. If after 2 years Barton chose not to repay the loan, Quantum would have the right to convert it to equity ownership. This structure technically wasn't a sale, so it bypassed the partnership agreement restrictions. Most importantly, the loan agreement would give Quantum and me observer rights at Meridian, not full board participation, but the right to attend meetings, review financials, and monitor operations. This gets you liquidity and freedom, Lisa explained to Barton. And it gives us a window into Meridian with the potential for future ownership. What about James? Barton asked. He'll fight this. The agreement doesn't require his approval, Mike pointed out. It's a personal loan to you, secured by assets you already own. He can't stop that. He'll know what you're really doing, Barton warned. Let him, I said, speaking for the first time in several minutes. What matters is that it's legally sound. Barton studied me with newfound interest. You seem particularly invested in this transaction, Mr. Carter. Beyond what your position at Whitman would suggest, I met his gaze steadily. I see potential where others might not. Meridian's core business is solid. With proper management and a more disciplined approach to growth, it could be exceptional. Not a direct answer to his implicit question, but enough to satisfy him for now. And your role in all this? He pressed. Beyond facilitating the introduction to Quantum? I glanced at Mike, who nodded slightly. Initially, I would serve as Quantum's representative, exercising those observer rights we discussed. Long-term, if the loan converts to equity, I would take a more active role in management. I see. Barton's expression was calculating now. You have ambitions beyond chemical manufacturing, it seems. I have ambitions to be involved with well-run, profitable businesses, I said smoothly. Meridian could be one of them, with the right leadership. The implication was clear, not James Sullivan's leadership. Barton seemed to consider this before nodding slowly. I want to review the loan documents with my personal attorney, of course. But in principle, I find this approach acceptable. Excellent, Mike said, his professional demeanor masking the excitement I knew he must be feeling. Lisa can have preliminary documents to you by Tuesday for review. And timing? Barton asked. How quickly could this be executed once we agree on terms? 2 weeks, Lisa said confidently. Perhaps less if there are no complications with the documentation. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, I could have my foot in the door at Meridian, the company where Vanessa worked, the company James Sullivan had built his reputation on. The first step toward taking everything from them, just as they had taken everything from me. I prefer sooner rather than later, Barton said. Once I make my decision, I see no reason to delay. We'll work as quickly as possible, Mike assured him. As we wrapped up the meeting and prepared to leave, Barton pulled me aside while Mike and Lisa gathered their materials. You haven't been entirely forthcoming about your interest in Meridian, he said quietly. There's something personal driving this. I considered denying it, but something in his eyes told me honesty, or at least partial honesty, would serve better. My interest is primarily business, I said. But yes, there is a personal element. Let's just say I have history with someone at Meridian that makes this transaction satisfying on multiple levels. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Ah, revenge then. Justice, I corrected. A rebalancing of scales. Barton studied me for a moment before nodding. Just ensure that your personal motivations don't compromise the business decisions. Meridian has over 100 employees whose livelihoods depend on the company's success. I'm well aware, I assured him. My personal interests align perfectly with making Meridian more successful, not less. By removing James Sullivan's incompetent leadership, by exposing Vanessa's undeserved promotions, I would actually be strengthening the company. The fact that it would destroy their relationship, their professional standing, their sense of security, that was simply a bonus. Very well, Barton said, seemingly satisfied. I'll look for those documents on Tuesday. On the drive back to the city, Mike was jubilant. I can't believe how smoothly that went. Barton is practically begging us to take his share of the company. He's desperate to get out. I agreed. Sullivan's expansion disaster was the last straw, and the loan structure Lisa developed is brilliant. Mike continued. Gets us in the door without triggering the partnership restrictions. When the documents are ready, I want to deliver them to Barton personally, I said. Maintain the relationship. Mike nodded. Smart. We should also start thinking about how to approach Chen once Barton's deal is secured. If we could get 2 of the 3 partners on our side, one step at a time, I cautioned, though internally I was already mapping out that next move. Let's get Barton locked down first. Right. Mike glanced at me. You know, when you first pitched this idea, I thought it was just wounded pride talking. But you've turned it into a legitimate business opportunity. I'm impressed. Thank you, I said, accepting the compliment, even as I acknowledged to myself that wounded pride, or more accurately, cold rage, remained my primary motivation. The business opportunity was real, but it was the means, not the end. The end was making Vanessa and James understand exactly what they had awakened when she spoke those 4 cruel words. I never loved you. They had taken my future from me. Now I would take control of theirs. And unlike Vanessa, I wouldn't lie about my intentions. True to Lisa's word, the loan documents were ready by Tuesday. I personally delivered them to Barton at a quiet restaurant near his apartment. Neutral ground where a business lunch wouldn't raise eyebrows. Everything appears to be in order, he said after reviewing the key provisions. My attorney has a few minor suggestions, but nothing that should delay the process. Excellent, I replied. How are you planning to handle this with your partners? Barton sipped his water. I'll tell them after the fact. Present it as a personal financial decision, which it is. James will be furious, of course, but there's nothing he can do legally to prevent it. And Chen? Michael will be concerned about what it means for the company, but his focus these days is almost entirely on his algorithm project. Barton hesitated. You should know that James recently brought in his companion ... to head client relations for the New York office, Vanessa. He was talking about Vanessa. Is that so? I kept my voice neutral. Yes, Vanessa Chen. No relation to Michael, by the way. She's been with the company for a few years, rising unusually quickly. His tone made his opinion of that rise clear. It's caused some resentment among the staff who've been there longer. Understandably, I commented, carefully controlling my expression. Is she qualified for the position? Academically, yes. Experience-wise, absolutely not. She's barely 30 with no management background before James started promoting her. Barton shook his head. Another example of his poor judgment recently? I wanted to ask more, to extract every detail about Vanessa's new role, her relationship with James, her daily patterns. But that would reveal too much. Instead, I steered the conversation back to safer ground. Once the loan is finalized, I'll be attending partner meetings as Quantum's observer. I reminded him. Any advice on how to handle that first encounter with Sullivan? Be prepared for hostility, Barton warned. James doesn't respond well to any perceived challenge to his authority. And make no mistake, he'll see you as exactly that, a threat. I can handle hostility, I assured him, thinking of the cold rage I'd been nurturing for months now. James Sullivan's hostility would be nothing compared to what I planned for him. 2 days later, Barton's attorney sent over the finalized loan documents with his approval. By the end of the week, the transaction was complete. $15 million transferred to Barton's personal account, secured by his 1/3 stake in Meridian Financial. I now had my foot in the door. More importantly, I had legitimate access to Meridian's internal operations, financials, and partner meetings. I could observe, gather intelligence, and plan my next moves from the inside. The first partner meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, a monthly review of operations and finances. Barton had informed his partners of the loan arrangement the previous day, so they were aware I would be attending as Quantum's representative. I arrived at Meridian's sleek Midtown offices 15 minutes early, dressed in my most impressive suit, projecting confidence and professional detachment. The receptionist, clearly briefed on my arrival, escorted me to the main conference room where the meeting would take place. Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Chen are already here, she informed me. Mr. Barton is expected momentarily. Thank you, I replied, straightening my tie as I prepared to come face to face with James Sullivan. The man who had stolen Vanessa, who had arrogantly believed he could take what was mine without consequences. The conference room door opened to reveal a large room dominated by a polished mahogany table. 2 men were seated at the far end, heads bent over documents, engaged in conversation. They looked up as I entered. Mr. Carter? The older of the 2 said, rising from his seat. Michael Chen, I presumed, around 50, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Welcome to Meridian. Thank you, I replied, crossing the room to shake his hand. I appreciate the accommodation. The other man remained seated, his expression cold and assessing. James Sullivan, younger than I'd expected, perhaps early 40s, handsome in a conventional way, with dark hair, a strong jaw, and the confident posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Accommodation, he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. Is that what we're calling this end run around our partnership agreement? James, Chen said quietly, a note of warning in his voice. No, let's be clear from the start. Sullivan continued, finally standing. He was tall, at least 3 inches taller than my 6 feet. Another advantage he'd had with Vanessa. This loan is a transparent attempt to circumvent the restrictions on selling partnership shares. We all know it. I met his gaze calmly. The arrangement between Quantum and Mr. Barton is a standard financial transaction. The observer rights are simply prudent oversight for a loan of this magnitude. Bullshit, Sullivan said bluntly. You're positioning for a takeover. Before I could respond, the door opened again and Richard Barton entered. He took in the tableau. Sullivan standing aggressively, Chen looking uncomfortable, me maintaining a neutral expression, and sighed visibly. I see introductions have been made, he commented dryly. Your loan partner was just explaining how this isn't a prelude to a takeover, Sullivan said, turning his glare to Barton. Perhaps you'd like to continue that fiction. James, enough, Barton said firmly. The loan is done. Mr. Carter is here as an observer, as is his right under the agreement. We have a business to run, so I suggest we get to it. Sullivan looked like he wanted to argue further, but Chen intervened. Richard's right. We have a full agenda today. Let's proceed professionally. He turned to me. Mr. Carter, please take a seat. We typically begin with a review of the monthly financials. I nodded and took a seat on the same side of the table as Barton, deliberately positioning myself where I could observe Sullivan's expressions throughout the meeting. As Chen distributed the financial reports, the door opened once more, and there she was, Vanessa. My heart lurched painfully despite my mental preparation. She looked different, her hair styled in a sleeker, more sophisticated cut than the soft waves I'd loved. Her makeup was more polished, her navy dress more expensive than anything she'd worn when we were together. But her eyes, her mouth, the graceful way she moved, all painfully familiar. She didn't notice me at first, her attention on the tablet in her hands. James, I have the client retention reports you wanted for the Chicago. She stopped abruptly as she finally registered my presence, her eyes widening in shock, all color draining from her face. Alex? She whispered as if seeing a ghost. Sullivan's head snapped up, his gaze darting between Vanessa and me, suddenly alert to the undercurrent of recognition. You know, Mr. Carter? He asked sharply. Vanessa seemed unable to form words, staring at me in paralyzed disbelief. I seized the moment, standing and extending my hand with a cold smile. Mrs. Chen and I are acquainted, yes, I said smoothly. It's been some time, Vanessa. You're looking well. She didn't take my offered hand, still frozen in place. Barton and Chen were watching curiously now, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. How ... Why are you here? Vanessa finally managed, her voice barely audible. Mr. Carter represents Quantum Venture Partners. Barton explained, frowning slightly at her reaction. They've provided me with a personal loan, secured by my partnership shares. He'll be attending our meetings going forward as their observer. Understanding dawned in Sullivan's eyes, quickly followed by anger. I see, he said, his voice dangerously soft. This is personal, isn't it? This has nothing to do with business. I turned to him with a pleasant smile that didn't reach my eyes. On the contrary, Mr. Sullivan, it's excellent business. Meridian has a strong core that's been poorly managed during its expansion phase. Quantum sees significant potential for improvement. You son of a... Sullivan began, but Chen cut him off. James, not here, he said firmly. Whatever this is, it can wait. We have a meeting to conduct. Sullivan looked like he might argue, but a quick glance at Vanessa, still pale and shaken, seemed to change his mind. Fine, he bit out. Vanessa, we'll discuss the Chicago reports later. For now, please distribute the monthly financials. She hesitated, clearly thrown by my presence, before nodding and retreating from the room. The door closed behind her with a soft click. As I returned to my seat, I caught Barton watching me with new understanding in his eyes. He now knew exactly who at Meridian I had history with. To his credit, he simply nodded slightly and turned his attention to the financial reports. The meeting proceeded with a palpable tension in the air. Sullivan was openly hostile, challenging every question I asked, every observation I made. Chen was more diplomatic but clearly wary. Barton attempted to maintain professional decorum, steering the discussion back to business matters whenever Sullivan's antagonism threatened to derail it. Throughout it all, I maintained a calm, professional demeanor, asking insightful questions about the failing expansion efforts, the debt load, the client retention issues. I wanted them to understand that despite the personal elements Sullivan had correctly identified, I was deadly serious about the business aspects as well. By the end of the 3-hour meeting, several things were clear. The Chicago office was failing catastrophically, with client acquisition numbers less than a quarter of projections. The Atlanta location was marginally better, but still operating at a significant loss. San Francisco was breaking even, but only after drastic staffing cuts that had damaged service quality. Most concerning for them, and most advantageous for me, Meridian's debt covenants with their primary lender included performance requirements that they were in danger of breaching. As the meeting concluded, Sullivan fixed me with a cold stare. This isn't over, Carter. Whatever game you're playing, I will shut it down. I met his gaze with equal coldness. This isn't a game, Mr. Sullivan. It's business. A concept you might want to reacquaint yourself with, given Meridian's current trajectory. His jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Chen stepped between us. That's enough. Mr. Carter, thank you for your observations today. We'll see you at next month's meeting. Actually, I said pleasantly, the observer rights include weekly updates on operations. I'll be back next Tuesday for the management committee meeting. Sullivan's expression darkened further, but he said nothing, turning abruptly and striding from the room. Chen followed after a brief apologetic nod in my direction. Barton remained behind, waiting until the door closed before speaking. That was Vanessa. he said. The one you have history with. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, she's with James now. I'm aware. He studied me for a long moment. This is more complicated than you led me to believe. The loan arrangement stands on its business merits, I reminded him. The personal element is incidental. Is it? Barton asked skeptically. Because what I witnessed today was far from incidental. James recognized it immediately. James Sullivan made several strategic errors that have put Meridian at risk. I said, deflecting. His relationship with Vanessa is just one of them. Barton sighed. Just remember what I said before. There are 100 employees here whose livelihoods depend on Meridian. Whatever personal vendetta you're pursuing, don't lose sight of that. I won't, I assured him, though my primary concern remained bringing Sullivan and Vanessa to their knees, not protecting the broader workforce. As I left Meridian's offices, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Seeing Vanessa had been even more jolting than I'd anticipated. Despite months of nursing my wounds, hardening my heart, focusing my rage, the sight of her had still affected me physically. A painful constriction in my chest, a momentary difficulty breathing. But I'd maintained my composure. I'd established my presence as a threat that Sullivan recognized immediately. I'd set the stage for what would come next. And what would come next was the systematic dismantling of everything James Sullivan had built, and everything Vanessa had gained through her betrayal. Step by careful step, I would take control of Meridian Financial. I would expose Sullivan's failures, Vanessa's undeserved promotions. I would watch as everything they thought secure crumbled beneath them. And when they finally understood the full extent of what I'd done, I would remind Vanessa of those 4 words that had set this all in motion. I never loved you. A simple confession that had created the instrument of her downfall. The tremor in Vanessa's hands was noticeable enough that James commented on it as they rode the elevator down to the parking garage that evening. You need to pull it together, he said, his voice low but intense. What the hell was that up there? You looked like you'd seen a ghost. I wasn't expecting to see my ex-boyfriend in our partner meeting. She snapped back, her nerves making her uncharacteristically sharp with him. How did this happen, James? How is Alex suddenly involved with Meridian? That's what I intend to find out, James said grimly as they reached his reserved parking space. Get in. We'll talk at the apartment. The drive to the luxury apartment building where they now lived together was tense and silent. Only when they were inside with the door firmly closed did James explode. God damn, Richard, he shouted, throwing his suit jacket onto a chair. That manipulative old bastard. He knew exactly what he was doing. I don't understand, Vanessa said, kicking off her heels and collapsing onto the sofa. How did Alex get involved with Quantum? He was a portfolio manager at Reynolds. This makes no sense. It makes perfect sense, James countered, pacing the living room. Your ex has engineered this whole thing. The loan to Richard is just a cover for what's really happening. He's trying to get control of Meridian. To get to you, Vanessa shook her head. That's not Alex. He doesn't think that way. The Alex you knew, maybe, James said, pouring himself a generous scotch. But people change when they're hurt. When they're betrayed, the word hung in the air between them. Betrayal. Because that's what it had been, even if neither of them had acknowledged it so plainly before. It's been 4 months, Vanessa said weakly. Why would he do this now? Revenge is a dish best served cold, James quoted grimly. He's been planning this, positioning himself. The question is, what do we do about it? Vanessa rubbed her temples, a headache building. What can we do? Richard took the loan. Alex has observer rights. We fight back, James said firmly. I built Meridian from nothing. I'm not going to let your ex-boyfriend take it from me because you broke his heart. The accusation stung, though Vanessa knew it was justified. What Richard told me about the loan, it's just for his share, right? You and Michael still control 2/3 of the company. For now, James said darkly. But if Michael gets spooked, if he thinks Richard's loan is the first step in a hostile takeover, he shook his head. Michael's been distant lately, focused on his algorithm project. I need to solidify his loyalty. And what about me? Vanessa asked quietly. Alex saw me today. He knows I'm here, that I'm with you now. James stopped pacing to look at her directly. Are you worried about working with him in the building? Because I can move you to the San Francisco office if... No, she interrupted quickly. The last thing she wanted was to be separated from James, especially now. I can handle Alex. I didn't expect this. None of us did. James agreed, his expression hardening. But I'm not going to let him win. Whatever his game is, we'll beat him at it. Vanessa wasn't so sure. The Alex she'd seen today wasn't the Alex she'd known for 5 years. The warm, open expression was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. His eyes, once so expressive, had been unreadable. Even his posture had changed, more commanding, more controlled. What had she done to him? What had her casual cruelty, "I never loved you," created? For the first time since leaving Alex, Vanessa felt a twinge of fear about the consequences of her actions. Not regret. She did love James, had been right to end things with Alex, but fear of what might come next. Because the man she'd seen in that conference room today wasn't just her ex-boyfriend. He was someone new, someone dangerous, and he was now embedded in the heart of her professional life. The weeks that followed my first Meridian meeting were a careful dance of observation and strategic positioning. I attended every meeting I was entitled to, asked probing questions about the failing expansion efforts, and gradually built relationships with key staff members who weren't directly aligned with Sullivan. Diane Zhang proved especially valuable, providing context for the tensions I observed and insights into the staff's perception of Sullivan's leadership and Vanessa's rapid rise. It's created 2 distinct camps within Meridian, she explained over drinks one evening. Team Sullivan, who still believe in the expansion vision and benefit from his favor, and everyone else, who see the financial reality and resent the special treatment his allies receive. And Vanessa? I asked, keeping my tone merely curious. Where does she fit in this dynamic? Diane rolled her eyes. She's Sullivan's right hand now, head of client relations for the New York office, a position created specifically for her, despite at least 3 more qualified candidates who were passed over. That must create resentment, I observed. You have no idea, Diane confirmed, especially since she flaunts the relationship. The private lunches in his office, the way she casually references their weekend plans during meetings. It's unprofessional and demoralizing. Each such detail was carefully filed away, both as potential leverage and as fuel for the cold rage that continued to drive me. Meanwhile, I maintained my duties at Whitman Chemical, implementing modest operational improvements that strengthened my position with both Eleanor and the Quantum leadership. I needed to prove myself capable of running a successful operation if I was to have any hope of taking control of Meridian eventually. My most significant discovery came during the 3rd week of my observer role at Meridian. While reviewing the debt covenant requirements with the company's CFO, a nervous man named Philip who clearly feared Sullivan's displeasure, I identified a critical vulnerability. These performance benchmarks for the expansion offices, I noted, pointing to a section of the loan agreement. You're currently well below the required metrics for Chicago and barely meeting them for Atlanta. Philip shifted uncomfortably. We're aware of the situation. Mr. Sullivan has a plan to improve performance before the next quarterly review. Which is, I prompted. Well, I'm not at liberty to share the specifics, Philip hedged. But Mr. Sullivan is confident we'll meet the requirements. I doubted that very much. From everything I'd seen, the Chicago office was a lost cause, hemorrhaging money with no prospect of reaching the required benchmarks. And if the benchmarks aren't met, I pressed. What remedies does the lender have? Philip's discomfort increased visibly. There are acceleration provisions, but it won't come to that. Later research confirmed what I'd suspected. If Meridian failed to meet the performance requirements for 2 consecutive quarters, their lender, Atlantic Capital Partners, could demand immediate repayment of the full loan amount, $12 million that Meridian simply didn't have available. It was the pressure point I'd been looking for. If I could somehow ensure that the Chicago office continued to underperform, Meridian would face a financial crisis that could force Sullivan to accept outside intervention, my intervention. The question was how to subtly influence that underperformance without being detected. I needed an ally in the Chicago office, someone with influence but grievances against Sullivan, someone who might be receptive to quietly undermining the operation. Marcus Reynolds, Diane suggested when I carefully raised the subject of Chicago's leadership during one of our drink sessions. He was sent there as punishment for challenging James too directly about the expansion costs. He's essentially been exiled to oversee a failing operation that James set up to fail. Sounds like someone with reason to be disgruntled. I observed. Oh, he's beyond disgruntled, Diane confirmed. He was on track to be named partner before he crossed James. Now he's stuck in Chicago, taking the blame for failures that were inevitable, given the constraints he's working under. Does he come to New York often? I asked. Monthly management meetings, she said. In fact, he'll be here next week. Why? Just curious about the Chicago situation, I said casually. It seems like the weak link in Meridian's expansion. It's the weak link James created deliberately, Diane said bitterly. Set up to fail so he could blame Marcus and justify pushing him out eventually. I filed that away. A man set up to fail by Sullivan would be a perfect ally in my efforts to accelerate that failure, especially if he believed doing so might actually save his own position in the long run. The opportunity to meet Marcus came during the following week's management meeting. As Quantum's observer, I was entitled to attend, much to Sullivan's barely concealed fury. Marcus Reynolds, no relation to my former employer, proved to be a sharp-featured man in his early 40s, with the intense focus of someone fighting a losing battle, but determined to go down swinging. During a break in the meeting, I approached him at the coffee station. Mr. Reynolds? Alex Carter from Quantum. I've been reviewing the Chicago operations numbers with great interest. He regarded me warily. Have you now? And what brilliant insights has an outsider gleaned from our struggling outpost? That it was designed to fail, I said bluntly, lowering my voice. Undercapitalized, understaffed, with impossible performance targets. His expression shifted from wariness to surprise. That's a remarkably accurate assessment, though not one James Sullivan would appreciate hearing. I don't work for James Sullivan, I reminded him. My concern is the overall health of Meridian, given Quantum's financial interest through Richard Barton. Right, the loan, Marcus said, making air quotes. The worst kept secret at Meridian is that you're positioning for a takeover. And if we were, I asked carefully, would that concern you? He gave a short, bitter laugh. Concern me? It would be the first good news I've had since being exiled to Chicago. Sullivan has been sabotaging that office from day one, ensuring it fails so he can blame me. I nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Do you have dinner plans tonight? That dinner, at a quiet restaurant far from Meridian's offices, proved immensely productive. Marcus laid out in painstaking detail how Sullivan had undermined the Chicago operation, insufficient staffing, inadequate marketing support, unrealistic client acquisition targets, and most damning, the direct poaching of Chicago's few successful clients for the New York office. He's making sure we fail, Marcus concluded bitterly, but making it look like it's my fault. What if, I proposed carefully, there was a way to turn this situation to your advantage? To ensure that Sullivan's machinations become apparent to everyone, including the other partners? Marcus studied me over his wine glass. I'm listening. The debt covenants, I explained. If Chicago fails to meet its benchmarks for a second consecutive quarter, it triggers acceleration provisions that could destabilize the entire company and force Sullivan to accept outside intervention. Marcus concluded, catching on quickly. Your intervention. Precisely. When? What would you need from me? I outlined my thoughts. Subtle adjustments to their client acquisition strategy, focusing resources on prospects less likely to convert quickly, delaying certain key initiatives until after the quarterly review. Nothing unethical, I emphasized. Nothing that actually harms clients or the long-term health of the office. Just a strategic delay in implementing improvements that Sullivan is counting on to meet those benchmarks. Marcus considered this for a long moment. And if this leads to a change in leadership, what happens to the Chicago office then? What happens to me under new leadership? I said carefully. The Chicago operation would be properly resourced and supported. Those who were loyal during the transition would be appropriately rewarded. And Sullivan would no longer be in a position to sabotage you or anyone else. Marcus took a long sip of his wine before responding. I've spent 15 years at Meridian. I believed in what we were building. Watching Sullivan drive it into the ground for his own ego has been painful. I understand loyalty, I assured him, but sometimes loyalty to the institution requires difficult decisions about its leadership. He nodded slowly. I won't do anything unethical or harmful to our clients, but if certain efficiency improvements are delayed, if certain marketing initiatives take longer to implement than Sullivan might hope, he shrugged. That's just the reality of managing an underfunded operation. We spent the next hour outlining specific areas where strategic delays might be implemented without raising suspicion. By the end of dinner, I had secured a valuable ally in my campaign to force Sullivan into a corner. As Marcus and I parted ways, he offered a final observation. You know, Carter, I've been trying to figure out your angle in all this. Quantum's interest is clear, financial opportunity, but you seem to have a personal stake. I maintained my neutral expression. I see potential in Meridian that's being squandered under current leadership. Uh-huh, Marcus said skeptically. And it has nothing to do with Vanessa Chen? I stilled. What makes you say that? I've been with Meridian a long time, he said. I noticed things. The way she practically fainted when she first saw you in the partner meeting. The way Sullivan suddenly became even more defensive than usual. The way you watch her when she's in the room, coldly, calculatingly. I said nothing, neither confirming nor denying. Whatever happened between you two, Marcus continued, just make sure your personal vendetta doesn't destroy what some of us have spent our careers building. The only person destroying Meridian is Sullivan. I replied evenly. I intend to save it. From Sullivan. From his incompetence. From Vanessa's undeserved influence. I would save Meridian by taking it for myself, and in the process, I would take everything they had built together. As I returned to my apartment that night, I felt a cold satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place. Sullivan was walking steadily toward the trap I was setting, blind to the danger until it would be too late. And Vanessa was watching me with growing unease, I could tell. In the meetings where she was present, she avoided eye contact, kept her distance. But occasionally I caught her staring when she thought I wasn't looking. Her expression a complex mix of fear, guilt, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Good. Let her worry. Let her wonder what I was planning. Let her feel a fraction of the uncertainty, the loss of control that I had felt when she walked out of my life with those 4 cruel words. I never loved you. Soon, very soon, she would understand exactly what that confession had unleashed. The remainder of the first part of this story details Alex's escalating plans as he manipulates Meridian's financial situation to force a crisis. Through strategic alliances with disgruntled employees and careful manipulation of business metrics, he positions himself to take advantage of the company's weaknesses. As the quarter ends, Meridian fails to meet its financial covenants, triggering loan acceleration clauses. James Sullivan finds himself in an impossible position, needing to raise capital quickly or lose control of the company. In a dramatic confrontation, Alex reveals his true intentions to Vanessa, making it clear that his actions are a direct consequence of her betrayal. The part ends with Alex on the verge of achieving his goal, about to gain controlling interest in Meridian through a complex financial maneuver that will force Sullivan out and leave Vanessa's professional future entirely in Alex's hands. The stage is set for the second part, where Alex will complete his takeover and decide exactly how to use his newfound power over the woman who said she never loved him and the man she left him for. The board meeting that would decide Meridian's fate, and by extension, Vanessa and James's futures, was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a rain-slick Tuesday morning. I arrived 40 minutes early, partly to review my notes one final time, but mostly because I couldn't stand the tension of waiting any longer. This was the culmination of months of calculated moves, of pain transformed into purpose, of betrayal forged into cold determination. The Meridian conference room was empty when I arrived, the long mahogany table gleaming under recessed lighting, 12 leather chairs arranged with perfect symmetry. I chose a seat that would allow me to observe everyone's faces, especially Vanessa's and James's. I wanted to see the exact moment when they realized that everything they had built was now mine. The doors opened at 8:35, and Michael Chen entered, looking harried and distracted. He nodded briefly in my direction before taking a seat and immediately burying himself in his tablet. Richard Barton arrived next, the strain of his wife's illness visible in the new lines on his face. He acknowledged me with a knowing look but said nothing. By 8:50, the room had filled with Meridian's senior management and the representatives from Atlantic Capital Partners, the lenders whose acceleration clauses had been triggered by the Chicago office's continued underperformance. The only people missing were Sullivan and Vanessa. They arrived together at 8:58, striding in with matching expressions of grim determination. Sullivan looked like he hadn't slept, his normally immaculate appearance showing subtle signs of strain. A slightly crooked tie, hair not quite perfectly styled. Vanessa followed a half step behind him, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that I'd never seen before. Her face a mask of professional composure that only those who knew her well, as I once had, would recognize as forced. Her eyes met mine for a brief moment before darting away. In that instant, I saw fear, uncertainty, and a flicker of something else. Not quite guilt, not quite regret, but something in that territory. Good. She should be afraid. They both should. Let's get this started, Sullivan said without preamble, taking his position at the head of the table. We all know why we're here. His gaze swept the room, lingering with particular hostility on me before turning to the Atlantic Capital representatives. Meridian has failed to meet certain performance benchmarks specified in our loan covenants, he acknowledged, specifically regarding the Chicago office's client acquisition targets. Atlantic Capital has exercised their right to accelerate our loan repayment. He paused. We have 30 days to repay $12 million or face default, which brings us to the proposals on the table. Richard Barton interjected, looking pointedly at Sullivan. There are two options before us. I'm aware, Richard, Sullivan snapped. I was getting to that. Barton merely raised an eyebrow and gestured for him to continue. Sullivan took a deep breath, visibly struggling to maintain his composure. Option 1 is Atlantic Capital's restructuring proposal, which would involve significant cuts to our operations, likely closing both the Chicago and Atlanta offices, and a reduction in management compensation. His jaw tightened. It would also require changes to our leadership structure, including my reassignment from CEO to a lesser role. No one spoke. The tension in the room was palpable. Option 2, Sullivan continued with obvious reluctance, is accepting an investment offer from Quantum Venture Partners. All eyes turned to me. I maintained a neutral expression, but inside a cold satisfaction was blooming. This was the moment I'd engineered since the day Vanessa had walked out of my life. Mr. Carter, perhaps you should outline Quantum's proposal, Barton suggested. I nodded and opened the folder before me. Quantum is prepared to invest $15 million in Meridian Financial. This would satisfy the accelerated loan repayment to Atlantic Capital and provide additional working capital. I paused, allowing the relief that flashed across several faces to register before continuing. In exchange, Quantum would receive a 40% equity stake in the company, 3 board seats, and operational control, including the appointment of a new CEO. Sullivan's face darkened. Operational control that would force me out of the company I founded. Not necessarily out, I corrected smoothly. But yes, you would no longer be CEO. You could remain as chairman, if the board approves, focusing on client relationships rather than day-to-day operations. A figurehead role, Sullivan spat. A role suited to your strengths, I countered. The fact is, Meridian's expansion strategy has failed. The Chicago and Atlanta offices are still losing money 18 months after opening. Client acquisition targets have been missed for 3 consecutive quarters. The debt load is unsustainable. I looked around the table. These aren't opinions. They're facts reflected in your own financial statements. Michael Chen, who had been silent until now, looked up from his tablet. And who would Quantum propose as the new CEO? The question everyone had been waiting for. I closed my folder deliberately. Me. Sullivan let out a harsh laugh. Of course. This was your end game all along. This is about business, mister. Sullivan, I said calmly. Your leadership has put Meridian at risk. The company needs a new direction. The bullshit, he said flatly. This is personal, and everyone in this room knows it. He glanced at Vanessa, whose face had gone completely pale. This is about her. The room went silent. I could feel every eye moving between Vanessa, Sullivan, and me. Those who hadn't known about our connection now putting the pieces together. My motivations are irrelevant, I said after a moment. What matters are the results. Meridian is facing financial collapse under your leadership. Quantum is offering a solution that saves the company. A solution that puts you in control, Sullivan countered. How convenient. I've already contacted other potential investors. He continued, desperation now evident in his voice. Given a few more weeks, I can secure alternative financing that doesn't require surrendering control of the company. Atlantic Capital has made it clear that the 30-day timeline is non-negotiable. One of their representatives interjected, we need resolution within that time frame. This is extortion, Sullivan insisted, his composure cracking further. It's a hostile takeover orchestrated by James, Michael Chen interrupted quietly. The Chicago office was your initiative. The expansion strategy was your plan. The current financial situation is the result of those decisions. He sighed. I've reviewed Quantum's proposal thoroughly. It's fair given the circumstances. Sullivan stared at Chen in disbelief. You're siding with him? After 20 years of partnership, I'm making a business decision. Chen replied, though he couldn't quite meet Sullivan's eyes. As should you. And you, Richard. Sullivan turned to Barton. Though I already know where you stand, considering your loan arrangement with Quantum. Barton straightened in his chair. My wife has less than a year left, James. I need to be with her, not fighting a losing battle here. Yes, I support Quantum's proposal. Sullivan looked around the table, searching for allies and finding none. Even the senior management team, people he'd personally hired and promoted, avoided his gaze. The writing was on the wall and everyone could see it. Everyone except Vanessa, who suddenly found her voice. "There must be another option," she said, looking around the table with growing desperation. "Something that doesn't require such a drastic change in leadership." I turned to her, allowing myself to really look at her for the first time since she'd walked out of my life 4 months ago. "There isn't, Vanessa. The numbers don't lie. Meridian needs new leadership." I paused. "Unless, of course, Mr. Sullivan would like to put the matter to a formal vote of the partners right now." Sullivan's jaw worked as he calculated the odds. Richard Barton would vote for Quantum's proposal. Michael Chen had just indicated his support. Sullivan himself would be outnumbered 2-1. "Fine," he said finally, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Accept the damn proposal. But this isn't over, Carter. Not by a long shot." I merely nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The triumph coursing through me was almost dizzying. I had done it. I had taken control of Meridian Financial. I had taken control of the company that Vanessa and James depended on. I had taken control of their futures, just as they had once taken control of mine. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of procedural details and signatures. The Atlantic Capital representatives left first, visibly relieved that their loan would be repaid. The senior management team followed, murmuring among themselves about what the leadership change would mean. Chen departed with a nod in my direction, a man who had made his peace with necessity. Barton lingered briefly to shake my hand. "Remember what we discussed," he said quietly. 100 employees who depend on Meridian for their livelihoods. "I remember," I assured him, though my focus remained on the 2 people still seated at the far end of the table. Sullivan and Vanessa, heads bent together in urgent, whispered conversation. His face was flushed with anger, hers was pale with shock. When they noticed me watching, Sullivan straightened and fixed me with a glare of pure hatred. "Enjoy your victory while it lasts," he said coldly. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." "I think I do," I replied calmly. "I'm stepping in to salvage a company that your ego and poor judgment nearly destroyed." He started to respond, but Vanessa laid a restraining hand on his arm. "James, not now," she murmured. "Let's go." Sullivan allowed her to lead him toward the door, but he paused on the threshold, turning back to face me one last time. "She never loved you," he said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Remember that while you're sitting in my chair." The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving me alone in the conference room that would soon be mine. I sank back into my chair, a complex mixture of emotions washing over me. Triumph, yes. Satisfaction at a plan perfectly executed. But also something else, something unexpected. Emptiness. Sullivan's parting shot had hit harder than I wanted to admit. "She never loved you." The same words Vanessa had used that night, now thrown back at me by the man she'd left me for. I had just achieved everything I'd been working toward for months. I had taken control of their company, their careers, their futures, and yet in that moment, I felt strangely hollow. But I pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't about happiness or fulfillment. It was about power, about control, about ensuring that Vanessa and James understood exactly what they had created when she spoke those 4 cruel words that night. I gathered my papers slowly, deliberately. Tomorrow would be my first official day as CEO of Meridian Financial. The real work and the real reckoning was just beginning. The news of Meridian's change in leadership spread through the financial community like wildfire. By the time I arrived at Meridian's offices the following morning, the story had already been picked up by several industry publications. Most framed it as a typical case of a company founder being ousted after a failed expansion strategy, with only a few hinting at deeper, personal dynamics at play. I had arranged for my personal items to be delivered and set up in the CEO's office before my arrival. I wanted no awkward transition period, no moment of uncertainty about who was now in charge. When I walked through Meridian's doors at precisely 8 a.m., I did so as the Chief Executive Officer, not as Quantum's observer or a visiting executive. The reception area fell silent as I entered. The staff had clearly been briefed on the leadership change, but seeing me walk in, the physical embodiment of that change, brought the reality home. I nodded professionally to the wide-eyed receptionist. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she managed, her voice only slightly unsteady. "Good morning, Lisa," I replied, having made it a point to learn the names of all frontline staff during my weeks as an observer. "Is the management team assembled in the conference room?" "Yes, sir. They're waiting for you." I had called an all-hands management meeting for 8:15, my first official act as CEO. It was time to establish the new order, to make my expectations clear, and most importantly, to determine the fate of the two people who had driven all of this: James Sullivan and Vanessa Chen. The conference room was packed when I entered. Every department head, senior manager, and director had squeezed in, with more crowding by the door. Sullivan was conspicuously absent, having refused to attend what he viewed as the coronation of his usurper. Vanessa was present, however, seated at the far end of the table, her face a careful mask of professional neutrality that didn't quite hide the anxiety beneath. "Good morning," I began, taking my position at the head of the table. "Thank you all for being here on such short notice." I surveyed the room, noting the mix of curiosity, apprehension, and in some cases, barely disguised hope on the faces before me. Many of these people had chafed under Sullivan's leadership. Some had been victims of his favoritism or mercurial temper. They were wondering what kind of leader I would be. "Let me start by addressing the obvious," I continued. "This is a significant change for Meridian. Change can be unsettling, even frightening, but it can also be an opportunity, a chance to correct course, to build on strengths, to address weaknesses honestly." I opened the folder before me, though I didn't need to reference my notes. I had rehearsed this speech countless times. Meridian's core business is strong. The client relationships you've built over years, the reputation for excellence in wealth management, these are solid foundations. But the aggressive expansion strategy of the past 18 months has put that foundation at risk. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Sullivan's expansion plan had few defenders left. Over the next 30 days, we will conduct a comprehensive review of all operations, with a particular focus on the Chicago and Atlanta offices. Decisions will then be made about restructuring, possible consolidation, and strategic direction moving forward. I paused, letting that sink in. Everyone understood the implications. Downsizing was coming, though the extent remained to be determined. This process will be transparent and merit-based, I emphasized. Performance, expertise, and commitment to Meridian's future will be the only criteria considered. Past relationships, personal connections, and politics will have no bearing on these decisions. My gaze flickered briefly to Vanessa, whose composure slipped just enough for me to see her swallow hard. She understood the message was meant specifically for her. "I will be meeting with each of you individually over the next 2 weeks to hear your perspectives, understand your roles, and discuss your vision for Meridian's future. Until those meetings are complete, I ask that you continue your current responsibilities as normal." I closed my folder. "Are there any immediate questions?" Marcus Reynolds, who had flown in from Chicago for the meeting, raised his hand. "What's the status of the Chicago office in the short term?" "Operations continue as normal during the review period," I replied. "Your cooperation in the assessment process will be critical to determining the path forward." Marcus nodded, a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. He knew his assistance in exposing the office's weaknesses would be rewarded, though he was professional enough not to show it openly. "What about James Sullivan?" Someone near the back asked. "What's his role now?" The question everyone wanted answered. I kept my expression neutral. "Mr. Sullivan remains a significant shareholder in Meridian. The board has offered him the position of non-executive chairman, focusing on key client relationships rather than operational management. He is considering that offer." What I didn't say was that Sullivan had reacted to the offer with a stream of profanity before storming out of the building yesterday. He hadn't returned or responded to any communication since. "Any other questions?" I asked, surveying the room. When no one spoke, I nodded. "Thank you for your attention. You'll receive scheduling details for your individual meetings shortly. That's all for now." As the room began to empty, I made a small gesture to Vanessa, indicating she should remain. The other managers filed out, several casting curious glances between us as they left. When the door finally closed, leaving us alone, the silence was deafening. Vanessa remained seated at the far end of the table, putting as much physical distance between us as possible. Her hands were clasped tightly on the polished surface, knuckles white with tension. "Your office or mine?" I asked, my voice deliberately casual. She looked up, momentarily confused. "What?" "For our discussion," I clarified. "Would you prefer your office or mine?" Mine, I suppose." I nodded and gathered my materials. "Lead the way." We walked through the main office area in silence, the weight of stairs following our progress. Everyone knew or suspected there was history between us. The exact nature of that history might not be common knowledge, but the tension was obvious to even the most oblivious observer. Vanessa's office was smaller than I expected for someone with her title, tucked away in a corner of the wealth management department rather than in the executive corridor. It was tastefully decorated but impersonal. No photos, no mementos, nothing to indicate the office belonged to her specifically. Just another sign of how recent her promotion had been. She closed the door behind us and turned to face me, arms crossed defensively. "What is this about, Alex? Please sit," I said, gesturing to her chair while taking one of the visitor seats across from her desk. A small power move, allowing her the symbolic authority of her own space while making it clear I didn't require such symbols. She sat reluctantly, her posture rigid. "If this is about my position, it is," I interrupted smoothly. "Among other things, you have no grounds to remove me," she said immediately. "My performance reviews have been exemplary. My client retention rate is the highest in the department." I raised an eyebrow. "Exemplary reviews from James Sullivan, the man you're sleeping with, the man who created a senior position specifically for you, bypassing several more qualified candidates." I let that hang in the air before continuing. "That's not exactly a sterling endorsement of your capabilities, Vanessa." Color flooded her cheeks. Anger, embarrassment, or some combination of both. "That's not fair. I earned my position." "Did you?" I asked mildly. "Or did you earn it the same way you earned your last 2 promotions? By leveraging your personal relationship with the CEO. You have no right to question my professional accomplishments," she said, her voice low but intense. "Whatever happened between us personally has nothing to do with my work at Meridian. That might be true if your rapid advancement hadn't coincided so perfectly with the development of your relationship with Sullivan." I leaned forward slightly. "When did it start, Vanessa? Was it really 8 months before you left me, as you claimed? Or had it been going on longer?" She flinched at the directness of the question. "That's none of your business." "It is now," I countered. "As CEO, I need to understand the dynamics that led to potentially inappropriate promotions within the company I'm responsible for." "This isn't about Meridian," she said, a note of desperation entering her voice. "This is about us, about what happened. You're using your position to punish me." There was a certain irony in hearing her accuse me of exploiting a position of power for personal reasons, considering her relationship with Sullivan. But I merely shrugged. "My motives are irrelevant. The facts remain. You were promoted to a senior position for which others were better qualified by a CEO with whom you were romantically involved." I paused. "That's a textbook conflict of interest, Vanessa. One that would concern any incoming CEO, regardless of personal history." She stared at me, a mix of emotions playing across her face. Fear, anger, and something that might have been regret. "What do you want from me, Alex?" she finally asked, her voice softening. "Is this revenge? Is that what all of this has been about?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications. What did I want? The answer had seemed so clear during the months I'd spent planning this takeover. I wanted her to suffer. I wanted her to feel the same loss of control, the same devastation I'd felt when she'd looked me in the eye and said those 4 cruel words, "I never loved you." But now, sitting across from her in the sterile confines of her office, watching the fear in her eyes, I found the answer less certain. Yes, I wanted her to understand the consequences of her actions. But beyond that, what I want, I said carefully, is a properly functioning wealth management division, one led by someone with the appropriate qualifications and experience. I stood, signaling the end of our conversation. "We'll review your department's performance metrics and prepare a detailed plan for improving client acquisition rates. Have it on my desk by the end of the week." She blinked in surprise. "You're not firing me?" "Not today," I replied, moving toward the door. "Your fate at Meridian will depend on your ability to demonstrate actual value to the company, beyond your relationship with Sullivan." I paused, hand on the doorknob. "Oh, and Vanessa, I'll be watching your work very carefully, much more carefully than James ever did." I left her office without waiting for a response, the stunned expression on her face providing a small measure of satisfaction. I hadn't fired her immediately, as she'd clearly feared. That would have been too quick, too merciful. No, I wanted her to live with uncertainty, with the knowledge that her professional future hung by a thread that I controlled, just as she had once controlled mine. The first week of my tenure as CEO of Meridian passed in a blur of meetings, reviews, and strategic planning sessions. I met individually with each member of the senior management team, assessing their capabilities, their loyalties, and their potential value in the restructured organization I was beginning to envision. James Sullivan remained conspicuously absent. He had not accepted the non-executive chairman role offered to him, nor had he officially declined it. He simply disappeared, ignoring calls and emails. leaving Vanessa to navigate the shifting political landscape of Meridian alone. I learned from Diane Zhang that Sullivan had retreated to his vacation home in the Hamptons, reportedly considering his options, while the company he had founded adjusted to new leadership. His absence was both a relief and a complication. A relief because it spared me daily confrontations, but a complication because his silence left his ultimate intentions unclear. As for Vanessa, she had thrown herself into preparing the departmental review I demanded, working late into the night according to security logs. Twice I'd walk past her office after hours to find her hunched over spreadsheets, a look of intense concentration on her face. She was fighting for her professional life, and we both knew it. On Thursday evening, as I was reviewing the preliminary reports on the Chicago office, my direct line rang. I was surprised to see Eleanor Whitman's name on the caller ID. "Alexander," she greeted me when I answered. "I've been following the news of your recent acquisition with great interest." "Have you?" I replied, setting aside the reports. "I wasn't aware Meridian Financial was on your radar." "It wasn't," she acknowledged. "But when one's financial advisor suddenly becomes the CEO of a wealth management firm through what appears to be a rather aggressive maneuver, one takes notice. I should have anticipated Eleanor's interest. She was far too shrewd not to connect the dots between my sudden career change, the Whitman acquisition, and my subsequent move to Meridian. It was a business opportunity that presented itself at the right time," I said carefully. "Indeed." Her tone suggested she wasn't convinced by my bland explanation. "And does this business opportunity have anything to do with the young woman you mentioned when we discussed your changing personal circumstances?" Eleanor's perception was uncomfortably acute. "What makes you ask that?" "Call it an old woman's intuition," she replied. "The timing of your breakup, your sudden interest in corporate acquisitions, and now this takeover of a company where, if my sources are correct, your former partner's employed." She paused. "It suggests a certain motivation beyond mere business strategy." I was silent for a moment, considering how much to reveal. Eleanor had been a valuable ally in my path to Meridian, even if she hadn't known the full extent of my plans. She deserved some measure of honesty. "There is a personal element," I admitted, "but the business opportunity is genuine. Meridian has a solid core that was being mismanaged. With proper leadership, it can be considerably more successful." "I don't doubt your business acumen, Alexander," she said, "but revenge is rarely a sound foundation for significant life decisions." "It's not revenge," I countered, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "It's reclaiming control." "Semantics," Eleanor dismissed. "My concern is that you may find the satisfaction less complete than you anticipate." "What do you mean?" There was a long pause before she answered. "When George died, I was consumed by grief, as you might expect. But there was also anger. At the doctors who failed to diagnose his condition sooner, at the hospital that mishandled his care, at fate itself for taking him from me." I remained silent, sensing she was building to something important. "I considered legal action against the hospital," she continued. "Spent months gathering evidence, building a case. I was determined to make them pay for what they'd taken from me." Another pause. "But then I realized something crucial, Alexander. No victory against the hospital, no financial settlement, no public acknowledgement of their failures would bring George back. The pursuit itself was keeping my grief alive, preventing me from moving forward." "This is different," I said quietly. "I'm not trying to bring back what I lost. I'm building something new." "Are you?" Her voice was gentle but insistent. "Or are you still defining your actions, your very future, in relation to her betrayal?" The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Was I still allowing Vanessa's actions to dictate my path, even as I believed I was taking control? "I appreciate your concern, Eleanor," I said finally, "but I know what I'm doing." "I hope so," she replied, unconvinced. "Just remember that true power isn't about controlling others, Alexander. It's about controlling yourself, your reactions, your choices, your future." She sighed. "Regardless, I wish you success with Meridian. Perhaps you might consider bringing some of George's former clients into your new fold. They've been somewhat adrift since his passing." The abrupt shift to business matters was Eleanor's way of respecting my reluctance to discuss the personal aspects further. I accepted the olive branch. "I'd be honored to meet with any of George's clients you'd recommend." After arranging a lunch to discuss potential client introductions, we ended the call. But Eleanor's words lingered, an unwelcome intrusion into the cold certainty that had driven me for months. True power isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself. I pushed the thought aside and returned to the Chicago reports. I had a company to restructure, decisions to make. Personal reflections would have to wait. Friday morning brought Vanessa to my office, departmental review in hand. She had requested the meeting through my assistant rather than approaching me directly, maintaining a formal distance that suited both of us. "Come in." I called in response to her knock. She entered with a professional demeanor, dressed in a conservative navy suit that I'd never seen during our time together. Everything about her presentation was designed to emphasize competence and professionalism, from her sleek ponytail to her minimal jewelry. "I've completed the wealth management division review you requested," she said, placing a bound report on my desk, including performance metrics, client acquisition data, and a detailed plan for improving our competitive position. I nodded and took the report, gesturing for her to sit. "Thank you for completing this so quickly. I'll review it thoroughly over the weekend." She remained standing. "If you have any questions or need clarification on any points, I'm available." "Sit, Vanessa," I said, more command than invitation. "There are a few things we should discuss now." Reluctantly, she took one of the chairs across from my desk, perching on the edge as if prepared to flee at any moment. The power dynamic between us couldn't have been more different from when she'd walked out of my life 4 months ago. Then she had been completely in control, delivering her cruel truth with calm certainty while I sat shattered. Now I controlled not just this conversation, but her entire professional future. "Have you heard from Sullivan?" I asked, getting straight to the point. She hesitated before answering. "Yes, he called last night." "And?" I prompted when she didn't elaborate. "And he's considering his options," she replied carefully. "He hasn't decided whether to accept the chairman position." "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." I leaned forward slightly. "What is he planning, Vanessa? Is he organizing a countermove? Contacting investors? Preparing a lawsuit?" Her expression tightened. "I don't know. You expect me to believe he's not discussing his plans with you? The woman he created a senior position for? The woman he's been living with? Believe what you want," she said, a flash of the old defiance in her eyes. "James keeps his business strategies to himself, even from me. Especially now when he knows I'm in a complicated position." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. There were none, only a weariness that suggested she was telling the truth. Sullivan was isolating himself, perhaps even from Vanessa. "All right," I said, changing tack. "Let's discuss your role here." Her posture stiffened further, if that was possible. "I've outlined my contributions to the wealth management division in the report. Our client retention rate has improved by 8% since I took over, and new client acquisition has—" "I'm not questioning your recent performance," I interrupted. "I'm questioning how you obtained the position in the first place." I opened a folder on my desk, her personnel file. "You were promoted twice in 3 years. The second promotion coming just 2 months after your relationship with Sullivan became common knowledge within the company. Correlation doesn't equal causation," she countered. "Those promotions were based on performance." "Were they?" I flipped through the file. "Your performance reviews are stellar, I'll grant you that. All conducted by Sullivan personally, bypassing normal evaluation protocols." I looked up at her. "But here's what's interesting, Vanessa. The client acquisition metrics you're so proud of, they only improved after you were promoted to your current role. Before that, your numbers were good but not exceptional. Certainly not promotion-worthy by objective standards." She flushed slightly. "That's a simplistic analysis. There are qualitative factors that numbers don't capture, such as your relationship with the CEO," I suggested mildly. "That's not fair," she protested, her composure cracking. "I worked hard for those promotions." "I'm sure you did," I replied, "but the timing remains suspect. And as the new CEO, I have to consider whether your position was granted based on merit or personal connection." "So this is it?" she demanded, anger finally breaking through her professional facade. "You're going to fire me to get back at me for leaving you?" "I haven't decided yet," I said calmly, watching the impact of my words register on her face. The uncertainty was crushing her, exactly as I'd intended. "As I said, I'll review your report over the weekend. We'll discuss your future at Meridian on Monday." She stood abruptly, unable to maintain the pretense of calm any longer. "This is cruel, Alex, and you know it. If you're going to fire me, just do it. Don't drag it out like this." "Cruel?" I repeated, rising to face her across the desk. "You want to talk about cruelty, Vanessa? How about telling someone after 5 years together that you never loved them? That everything we built, everything we shared was a lie? That while I was planning our future, you were sleeping with your boss?" The words escaped before I could stop them, the cold facade I'd maintained cracking to reveal the raw pain beneath. We both froze. the sudden shift from professional conflict to personal history catching us off guard. "I never meant to hurt you," she said quietly after a moment. "And yet you did," I replied, struggling to regain my composure. "Deliberately, completely, and without remorse." "That's not true," she insisted. "I did feel remorse. I still do. But our relationship wasn't working, Alex. It hadn't been working for a long time. So you've revised history now," I said bitterly. "It wasn't that you never loved me. It was that our relationship wasn't working." "Which is it, Vanessa?" She looked away. "It's complicated." "No, it's really not." I sat back down, physically and emotionally distancing myself. "Your report." I gestured to the bound document she'd brought. "I'll review it. We'll talk on Monday." She recognized the dismissal but hesitated at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for how I ended things. The words I chose. They were cruel, and you didn't deserve that." I looked up at her, my expression deliberately blank. Monday, Vanessa, 9 a.m. After she left, I sat motionless, staring at the closed door. The carefully constructed walls I'd built around my pain had been breached, if only briefly. I couldn't allow that to happen again. This wasn't about healing or closure or even honest confrontation. It was about power, about control, about ensuring that she understood exactly what her betrayal had created. I picked up her report and forced myself to focus on the numbers, the strategies, the professional analysis. I would evaluate it objectively, as I would any manager's work. And on Monday, I would decide her fate based on what would benefit Meridian most and what would make her understand most completely that her future now rested entirely in my hands, just as mine had once been in hers. The weekend passed in a blur of work and strategic planning. I divided my time between reviewing Vanessa's report, which was, I had to admit, thorough and insightful, and finalizing my restructuring plan for Meridian's failing satellite offices. By Sunday evening, I had made decisions that would reshape the company significantly, including the fate of several key executives. Vanessa's among them. I arrived at the office early Monday morning, before most of the staff. I wanted time to prepare for the day's confrontations, particularly my 9 o'clock meeting with Vanessa. The quiet of the empty executive floor was soothing, allowing me to review my notes one final time before the battles began. At 8:15, my concentration was broken by a commotion in the reception area. Raised voices, the sound of something heavy hitting a desk. I rose from my chair, irritated by the disturbance, and moved toward my office door. Before I could reach it, the door burst open, revealing James Sullivan, disheveled and clearly furious. Behind him, my flustered assistant was attempting to intervene. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," she called. "He just pushed past me. Should I call security?" "That won't be necessary, Grace," I replied calmly, returning to my desk. "Mr. Sullivan and I are overdue for a conversation." Sullivan slammed the door shut, cutting off my assistant's concerned expression. He looked terrible, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, his normally impeccable appearance a distant memory. The past week had clearly taken its toll. "You smug bastard," he snarled, advancing toward my desk. "Sitting in my office, acting like you belong here." "This is my office now," I corrected mildly. "As for belonging, the board seems to think I do. Your absence this past week hasn't exactly strengthened your position." "Don't lecture me about my company," he spat. "I built Meridian from nothing, while you were managing other people's money and playing house with Vanessa." The jab was intended to provoke me, but I maintained my composure. "Is there a purpose to this visit, Mr. Sullivan? Beyond venting your frustration at the consequences of your own poor decisions?" "Poor decisions," he repeated incredulously. "My only poor decision was not recognizing the threat you posed sooner. This whole thing, the loan to Richard, your observer role, the pressure on our Chicago office, it was all a calculated plan to take over Meridian, wasn't it? All because Vanessa left you for me? Your expansion strategy was failing long before I became involved," I pointed out. "The Chicago office was hemorrhaging money, the debt covenants were at risk, and your partners were increasingly dissatisfied with your leadership." I shrugged. "I simply recognized an opportunity." "Purr. Bullshit," Sullivan said flatly. "This is personal. You engineered this takeover to get back at us." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. The once powerful CEO reduced to this. Angry, desperate, somewhat pathetic. It should have been satisfying. It had been what I wanted, after all. But somehow, seeing him like this brought less pleasure than I'd anticipated. "My motivations are irrelevant," I said finally. "What matters is that Meridian now has leadership focused on sustainability rather than ego." The board understands that. The senior management team understands that. Even your partners understand that. The board, he scoffed. My spineless partners. They'll regret turning on me. His eyes narrowed. And what about Vanessa? Have you fired her yet? Is that part of your revenge fantasy? Vanessa's fate at Meridian will be determined by her value to the company, I replied neutrally. I'm meeting with her at 9 to discuss her future. Sullivan's laugh was bitter. How generous of you to discuss it. We both know you've already decided to destroy her career. Actually, I said I've decided to promote her. The words hung in the air between us. Sullivan's expression shifted from anger to confusion. What? Her departmental review was excellent, I explained, enjoying his bewilderment. Her strategic recommendations for the wealth management division are solid. She clearly understands the business. I paused. What she lacked was legitimate opportunity instead of promotions based on her relationship with you. You're lying, Sullivan said flatly. This is some kind of trick. It's a business decision, I corrected. Vanessa has potential that was obscured by your favoritism. By promoting her based on actual merit rather than personal connection, I'm correcting your mistake. Sullivan stared at me, trying to process this unexpected development. She won't accept it, he said finally. She won't work for you, not after what you've done. That will be her choice, I replied calmly. But I suspect she's more pragmatic than you give her credit for. His face darkened with renewed anger. This isn't over, Carter. I still own 20% of Meridian. I have allies on the board, clients who are loyal to me personally. I can make your life hell. You're welcome to try, I said, standing to signal the end of our conversation. But I'd suggest accepting the chairman role instead. It would be better for everyone, including you and Vanessa. I don't need your advice on what's best for Vanessa or me, he snapped, moving toward the door. Just remember what I told you before. She never loved you. No matter what power you think you have over her now, that fact won't change. With that parting shot, he yanked open the door and stormed out, leaving a wake of startled employees who had begun to arrive for the workday. I remained standing behind my desk, his words echoing in my mind despite my efforts to dismiss them. She never loved you. It shouldn't still have the power to hurt me. Not after everything I'd accomplished, all the control I'd reclaimed. And yet the pain remained, a persistent ache beneath the cold satisfaction of my victory. Before I could dwell on it further, my phone buzzed with a message from Grace. Miss, Chen is here for your 9 o'clock. I took a deep breath, centering myself. Send her in. Vanessa entered warily, clearly having witnessed Sullivan's dramatic exit. James was here, she said. It wasn't a question. He was, I confirmed, gesturing for her to sit, making his feelings about the current situation abundantly clear. She sat stiffly, her expression guarded. He's been struggling with the transition. Understandable, I replied, but ultimately irrelevant to our discussion. I opened her file on my desk. I've reviewed your report thoroughly, Vanessa. It's impressive work. Surprise flickered across her face. Thank you. Your analysis of the wealth management division's strengths and weaknesses is accurate. Your recommendations for improving client acquisition and retention are sound. I looked up at her. The question is whether you're the right person to implement those recommendations. She tensed visibly. If this is about my relationship with James, it's about your capabilities, I interrupted. Your understanding of the business, your strategic thinking. I paused. And yes, your ability to operate independently of Sullivan's influence. I can, she said firmly. My work stands on its own, regardless of my personal relationships. I studied her for a moment, noting the determination in her eyes, the set of her jaw. Despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation of my emotions, I couldn't deny that Vanessa was intelligent, capable, and driven. Her report had demonstrated a level of insight that went beyond what Sullivan would have influenced or directed. I believe you, I said finally, which is why I'm offering you a new position. She blinked, clearly having prepared herself for termination rather than a new role. What position? Director of Strategic Initiatives, reporting directly to me. I slid a folder across the desk to her. You'll be responsible for implementing the restructuring of our wealth management approach across all offices, including the revised strategy for Chicago and Atlanta. Vanessa stared at the folder without opening it. Why? She asked quietly. Why would you promote me when you could easily fire me? When that's clearly what you wanted when you took over Meridian, it was a fair question. One I had asked myself repeatedly over the weekend as I'd finalized my decision. The answer I'd arrived at wasn't entirely comfortable. Because firing you would be personal, I said after a moment. And while my initial motivation for acquiring Meridian may have been influenced by personal factors, my decisions as CEO need to be business-focused. I nodded toward the folder. You have the skills Meridian needs during this transition. It would be poor leadership to remove you out of spite. She studied my face, looking for the trap, the hidden agenda. And my relationship with James is your personal business, I replied. As long as it doesn't interfere with your professional responsibilities or create conflicts of interest, which it would if he accepts the chairman role, she pointed out. True, I acknowledged. In that case, reporting structures would need to be adjusted appropriately. But that's a bridge we'll cross if necessary. Vanessa slowly opened the folder, reviewing the details of the position I was offering. The title, the responsibilities, the compensation, all representing a significant advancement from her current role, and all legitimately earned based on her capabilities rather than her personal connections. This is unexpected, she finally said, closing the folder. Think about it, I suggested. You don't need to decide immediately. And if I decline, then you can continue in your current role, at least through the restructuring period. I kept my expression neutral. This isn't an ultimatum, Vanessa. It's an opportunity. She nodded slowly, still processing. May I ask you something, Alex? Something personal? I hesitated, then nodded. You can ask. All of this, buying Meridian, taking James's position, now offering me a promotion instead of firing me? What are you really trying to achieve? What do you want? The question echoed Eleanor's from our phone call. What did I want? The answer had seemed so clear when I began this journey. Revenge, control, the satisfaction of watching Vanessa and Sullivan lose everything they had built together. But now, with that goal essentially accomplished, the clarity had faded, leaving uncertainty in its place. Initially, I said slowly, I wanted you to understand what it felt like to have your future controlled by someone else, to experience the same loss of agency that I felt when you left. I paused, acknowledging the truth to myself as much as to her. But now, I'm less certain. Less certain about what you want? She asked. Less certain that controlling your professional future will provide the closure I thought it would? I admitted. Satisfaction is less complete than anticipated. Eleanor had been right about that much, at least. The victory felt hollow in ways I hadn't expected. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, absorbing my words. For what it's worth, she finally said, I do regret how I ended things. Not the ending itself, James and I, that's real, but the cruelty of it, the words I chose. She looked directly at me. I did love you, Alex. Maybe not in the way you deserved, not in the way I should have, but I did. The confession should have meant something. 4 months ago, it might have cracked my heart open with hope or relief. Now it simply existed, a fact that neither healed nor further wounded. Thank you for your honesty, I said formally, retreating to professional distance. Think about the position. Let me know your decision by Wednesday. She recognized the dismissal and stood to leave, taking the folder with her. At the door, she paused. James won't accept this easily, you know. The chairman role, my promotion, any of it. He'll fight back. I'm counting on it, I replied with a cold smile. His resistance will only confirm the board's decision to remove him from operational control. After she left, I turned to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. The conversation had left me unsettled. My certainty about what I wanted, what I had wanted all along, suddenly less absolute. I had achieved what I set out to do. I had taken control of Meridian, removed Sullivan from power, and placed Vanessa's future in my hands. I had reversed the dynamic completely, becoming the one with power rather than the one left shattered and powerless. And yet Eleanor's words continued to haunt me. True power isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself. Perhaps the real test of my power wasn't how completely I could dominate Vanessa and Sullivan's futures, but how fully I could reclaim my own. Not as a response to their betrayal, but as an independent choice, a new direction defined by what I wanted to build, rather than what I wanted to destroy. It was a disquieting thought, one that challenged the cold certainty that had driven me for months. I pushed it aside and turned back to my desk, to the practical business of restructuring Meridian. There would be time for philosophical reflections later. For now, there was work to be done, a company to rebuild, and yes, still a point to be made, even if I was no longer entirely certain what that point was. The following weeks unfolded with the rapid pace of significant corporate restructuring. The Chicago office was downsized substantially but not closed entirely, with Marcus Reynolds retained as its leader, a decision that surprised some, but made strategic sense given his intimate knowledge of the operation's weaknesses. Atlanta was merged administratively with the New York headquarters, removing layers of redundant management. The San Francisco office, which had shown the most promise of the expansion efforts, received additional resources and a clearer strategic focus. Throughout it all, I maintained the professional distance and strategic focus of a CEO implementing necessary changes. If my decisions occasionally aligned with personal scores to be settled, like removing several of Sullivan's most vocal supporters from key positions, they were always justified by business logic that the board could support. Vanessa had accepted the Director of Strategic Initiatives position after 2 days of consideration. Her decision seemed to finalize her break with Sullivan, who had not returned to Meridian or responded to the board's communications about the chairman role. According to office gossip relayed by the ever-helpful Diane Zhang, Sullivan and Vanessa were now living separately, their relationship another casualty of Meridian's power shift. I told myself I didn't care about their personal situation, that it was irrelevant to my professional goals for Meridian, but the truth, which I acknowledged only in rare moments of honesty with myself, was more complicated. The knowledge that I had not just taken Sullivan's company, but also, indirectly, contributed to the collapse of his relationship with Vanessa should have been the crowning satisfaction of my revenge. Instead, it left me feeling strangely empty. 3 weeks into the restructuring, I received an unexpected visitor. Michael Chen, who had been largely absent during the transition, focusing on his algorithm project rather than Meridian's day-to-day operations, requested a meeting. He arrived punctually at the scheduled time, looking more engaged than I had seen him since taking over as CEO. "Thank you for making time," he said as he settled into one of the chairs across from my desk. "I've been following the restructuring from a distance. Your approach has been instructive." "I hope that's a compliment," I replied, unsure of his meaning. Chen smiled slightly. "It is, though perhaps a complicated one. You've made difficult decisions with impressive clarity. The question is whether that clarity comes from strategic insight or personal motivation." I kept my expression neutral. "The results are the same either way." "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "But motivation matters for sustainability. A strategy driven by personal vendetta may succeed initially but lacks the foundation for long-term success." It was the most direct reference any of Meridian's leadership had made to my rumored motivations for acquiring the company. I decided to meet it with equal directness. My motivation for acquiring Meridian included personal elements, I admitted. But my decisions as CEO are based on what will make the company successful. Chen studied me thoughtfully. "And what about your decision regarding Vanessa Chen? Was promoting her rather than firing her based on business logic or something else?" "Her capabilities warranted the promotion," I said firmly. "Her relationship with Sullivan clouded that fact previously, but her work stands on its own merits." "Interesting," Chen mused. "Most men in your position would have removed her immediately, either out of lingering anger or to eliminate Sullivan's influence within the company." "I'm not most men," I replied simply. "Clearly not." He leaned forward slightly. "Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. I want to formally resign my partnership in Meridian." The statement caught me off guard. "May I ask why?" Chen reached into his briefcase and removed a sleek folder embossed with the logo Quanta Edge. "This is my algorithm project," he explained, sliding the folder across the desk. "It's grown beyond a side interest. I've secured venture funding to develop it as a standalone company." I opened the folder, scanning the executive summary of what appeared to be an AI-driven investment platform. "Impressive," I acknowledged. "But why leave Meridian entirely? Surely there could be synergies between the two." "There could," he agreed. "But my attention is increasingly divided. And after 20 years of partnership with James and Richard, it feels like the right time for a clean break, a fresh start." He paused. "Besides, your restructuring has made it clear that Meridian is now your company, shaped by your vision. It seems appropriate that ownership should reflect that reality." "You want to sell your shares?" I concluded. "Yes," he confirmed. "And I'd like to offer them to you first before approaching other potential buyers." I leaned back, considering the implications. Chen owned 20% of Meridian. Combined with the 33% controlled by Quantum through Barton's loan arrangement, acquiring Chen's shares would give me majority control. Sullivan, with his 20%, would be effectively neutralized as a threat, unable to block major decisions or rally sufficient support on the board. "I'm interested," I said carefully, "but I'm curious about your timing." "Why now?" Chen's expression was knowing. "Let's be candid, Mr. Carter. You've been systematically consolidating your position at Meridian since the day you arrived. You've restructured operations, replaced key personnel, and established your authority as CEO. The only remaining threat to your control is James Sullivan, who still has enough ownership to cause problems if he decides to fight back. Which he will, I acknowledged. Which he will, Shen agreed. By selling my shares to you, I'm essentially ending that fight before it begins. Sullivan cannot prevail against your majority ownership. That benefits me, I noted. But what do you gain beyond the sale price? Certainty, Shen replied simply. A clean exit to focus on my new venture without being drawn into a protracted power struggle. He paused. And perhaps some satisfaction in knowing that James's hubris has finally brought about the consequences he has long deserved. I raised an eyebrow. You and Sullivan were partners for 20 years. Yes, Shen acknowledged. And for 15 of those years, we worked well together. But the James Sullivan who built Meridian with Richard and me is not the same man who nearly destroyed it with his ego-driven expansion. The man who let his personal relationship cloud his professional judgment. The man who refused to acknowledge his mistakes until it was too late. There was genuine disappointment in Shen's voice. The kind that comes from watching someone you once respected fall short of what you believe them to be. I understood the feeling all too well. I'll need to discuss this with Quantum, I said after a moment. They have a significant interest in any ownership changes. Of course, Shen nodded. Take whatever time you need. My offer stands for 2 weeks. After he left, I sat motionless, processing the unexpected opportunity. Majority ownership of Meridian. Complete control, beyond what I had even hoped for when I began this journey. The final definitive victory over Sullivan, removing any possibility that he could reclaim what he had lost. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt a curious emptiness, as if achieving exactly what I had wanted only highlighted how little it actually meant. I reached for my phone to call Mike at Quantum, then hesitated. There was someone else I needed to speak with first. Someone whose perspective I suddenly valued more than I had anticipated. Vanessa answered my call on the second ring. Alex? Is everything all right? Everything's fine, I assured her. I'd like to discuss something with you. Are you free for dinner tonight? There was a pause, surprise evident, even through the phone. Dinner? With you? A professional discussion, I clarified, about Meridian's future leadership structure. All right, she agreed, though wariness remained in her voice. Where and when? We arranged to meet at a small Italian restaurant I knew was discreet enough for a sensitive business conversation. After ending the call, I stared out the window at the city skyline, questioning my own motivations. Why had I felt compelled to consult Vanessa about Shen's offer? Her opinion had no bearing on my decision from a business perspective, and yet I needed to hear what she would say, to understand how she viewed Meridian's future and her place in it, now that everything had changed between us, between her and Sullivan, between all the players in this complex drama we had created. Perhaps, I admitted to myself reluctantly, I needed to understand what I truly wanted from this final act of acquisition. Was it still about revenge, about control, about making Vanessa and Sullivan pay for what they had done? Or had it become something else? Something about building rather than destroying, about future rather than past. I didn't have an answer, but as I prepared for our dinner meeting, I acknowledged that Vanessa's perspective might help me find one. The restaurant was quietly elegant, with well-spaced tables that ensured privacy for sensitive conversations. I arrived early, selecting a corner table that offered a view of the entrance, while remaining partially secluded from the rest of the dining room. The maitre d' had recognized me. I'd been a regular before Vanessa left, and seated me with a discreet nod of welcome, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The last time I'd been here, I'd been with Vanessa, celebrating her promotion to account manager at Meridian. She'd been excited, proud, grateful for the recognition of her hard work. I'd been happy for her, supportive, completely oblivious to the fact that her boss, the man who had approved that promotion, was already more than her boss. I pushed the memory aside as Vanessa entered the restaurant. She looked beautiful but subdued, dressed in a simple black dress that managed to be both professional and elegant. She spotted me immediately and made her way to the table, her expression guarded. "Thank you for coming," I said as she took her seat. "Of course," she replied, placing her napkin in her lap with deliberate care. Though I have to admit, I was surprised by the invitation. It seemed appropriate for the discussion we need to have, I explained, signaling to the waiter. "Wine? Just water for me," she said. "I'd like to keep a clear head." We ordered quickly. She still remembered my preferences, choosing a dish she knew I would enjoy, while I did the same for her. The small intimacy was both comforting and painful, a reminder of the thousands of meals we'd shared before everything fell apart. Once the waiter had departed, I got straight to the point. Michael Chen is selling his shares in Meridian. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. To you? That's his offer, yes. He approached me directly rather than putting them on the market. Because combined with Quantum's control of Richard's shares, that would give you majority ownership. She concluded quickly. James would be completely sidelined. Exactly. I studied her face, looking for her reaction to this development. Chen seems to think Sullivan is preparing some kind of countermove to reclaim control. This would prevent that possibility. Vanessa's expression was carefully neutral. He is, she confirmed after a moment. Planning a countermove, that is. The admission surprised me. You're still in contact with him, then? We're trying to figure things out, she said hesitantly. Our personal relationship is complicated now, but we do still talk. And he shared his plans with you. I kept my tone neutral, though the thought of them still together, still planning together, sent an unexpected spike of pain through me. Some of them, she acknowledged. He's been approaching Meridian's major clients, trying to secure commitments that they'll follow him if he leaves to start a competing firm. It was exactly the kind of move I would have expected from Sullivan, leveraging personal relationships to undermine Meridian's client base. And would they follow him? Vanessa hesitated. Some would. The ones who've been with him the longest, who see him as their personal financial advisor rather than a representative of Meridian. How many? Enough to hurt, she admitted. Maybe 30% of our top-tier clients. I nodded slowly, absorbing this information. It was valuable intelligence, though I suspected Vanessa had shared it for reasons beyond merely answering my question. Why are you telling me this, Vanessa? Our food arrived, creating a brief pause in the conversation. When the waiter had gone, she looked at me directly for what felt like the first time since I'd taken over Meridian. Because I don't want to be caught in the middle anymore, she said simply. Between you and James, between my past and my future, between loyalty and self-preservation. And telling me about Sullivan's plans positions you on which side exactly? I asked, not unkindly. On Meridian's side, she replied. The company has over 100 employees whose livelihoods would be threatened if James succeeds in poaching our major clients. I don't want that to happen, regardless of my personal relationships. Her answer echoed Richard Barton's early warning to me about the broader consequences of my revenge. The reminder was unsettling. If I buy Chen's shares, I said carefully, Sullivan's plan becomes irrelevant. He can't take enough clients to seriously damage Meridian once I have majority control and can implement retention strategies. True, she agreed. But is that what you want, Alex? To spend millions acquiring more of Meridian just to block James? Is that really the end game you've been working toward? The question hit uncomfortably close to the doubts I'd been having myself. What would you suggest instead? She seemed surprised by the question, as if she hadn't expected me to value her opinion. Honestly, let him go. Buy out his shares instead of Chen's. Give him the freedom to start his new firm with the clients who are loyal to him personally, while you retain the institutional clients who care more about Meridian's brand and stability. A clean break, I mused. Exactly, she said, warming to the idea. It's the most practical solution for everyone. James gets to save face by starting fresh rather than serving under you. You get clear control of Meridian without the distraction of his constant resistance. The employees get stability. Even the clients get to choose the relationship that works best for them. Her proposal was logical, pragmatic, and surprisingly fair to all parties. It was also completely contrary to the revenge I had planned for so many months. Letting Sullivan leave with his dignity intact, with enough clients to build a new firm, with the freedom to start over, it was the opposite of the crushing defeat I had envisioned inflicting. And what about you? I asked, watching her carefully. Where do you fit in this scenario? She met my gaze steadily. That depends on what you want, Alex. If your goal is still to punish me for what happened between us, then I'll accept whatever decision you make about my future at Meridian. And if that's not my goal anymore? The question surprised even me as it left my lips. Then maybe we can find a way to work together professionally, despite our history, she said quietly. I'm good at what I do. You know that now, and I genuinely care about Meridian's success. I nodded slowly, considering her words. The idea of working with Vanessa long-term of setting aside the revenge that had driven me for months in favor of a pragmatic business relationship. It was both unsettling and strangely appealing. It suggested a path forward not defined by our past, a future not constrained by the pain she had caused me. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "About all of it. Chen's offer, Sullivan's plans, your suggestion. That's all I'm asking," she replied with a small smile. "That you consider alternatives to the vendetta." We finished our meal with conversation that drifted to safer topics: the restructuring progress, the performance of the revised Chicago operation, the market conditions affecting our client portfolios. It was almost normal, almost comfortable, as if we were just two colleagues discussing business over dinner. But as I walked her to her car afterward, the weight of our shared history returned, impossible to ignore in the quiet intimacy of the parking lot. "Thank you for dinner," she said, turning to face me beside her vehicle, "and for listening to my perspective. Thank you for your honesty," I replied. "About Sullivan's plans, about your own position." She nodded, then hesitated, as if debating whether to say more. Finally, she took a deep breath. "Can I ask you something, Alex? Something personal?" "You can ask," I echoed my response from our office meeting. "Has it helped?" she asked quietly. "Taking over Meridian? Gaining control over our professional lives? Pursuing this revenge? Has it healed what I broke when I left?" The question was breathtaking in its directness, in its acknowledgement of the pain she had caused and the response it had provoked. I could have evaded, could have denied that healing had ever been my goal. Instead, I found myself answering with an honesty that matched hers. "No," I admitted. "It hasn't. The satisfaction is less than I anticipated. The control less meaningful." "What would help then?" she asked, her voice gentle but not pitying. "What would give you the closure you're looking for?" I shook my head slightly. "I don't know anymore. When you left, when you said those words to me, all I wanted was to make you feel what I felt. The helplessness, the shock, the loss of control over my own future. Now that I've essentially achieved that, it feels hollow." "Maybe," she suggested carefully, "what you really need isn't control over my future or James's. Maybe what you need is to reclaim control over your own, independent of what happened between us." Her words echoed Eleanor's wisdom so closely that I almost smiled. Two very different women reaching the same conclusion about what I truly needed. "Maybe," I acknowledged. "It's something to consider." She nodded and unlocked her car. "Good night, Alex. Let me know what you decide about Chen's offer." "I will," I promised. "Good night, Vanessa." As I watched her drive away, I felt a strange sense of clarity beginning to form. The path forward was becoming visible, though it wasn't the one I had envisioned when I started this journey. It wasn't about destroying what Vanessa and Sullivan had built together. It was about building something new for myself, something defined by my own vision rather than by my response to their betrayal. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. For months, revenge had been my purpose, my driving force. Without it, who was I? What did I want? The questions demanded answers I wasn't sure I had yet. But perhaps finding those answers was the real victory I had been seeking all along. The decision crystallized over the next 2 days, emerging not as a single moment of clarity, but as a gradual alignment of thoughts and priorities. By the time I called Mike to discuss Chen's offer, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. "So Chen is selling his shares," Mike summarized after I laid out the situation. "That's a significant opportunity. Combined with Barton's portion, we'd have effective control of Meridian." "We would," I agreed. "But I'm proposing a different approach." I outlined my alternative plan. Approach Sullivan with an offer to buy his shares instead, allowing him to leave Meridian with the capital to start his own firm, taking the clients most personally loyal to him. Meanwhile, we would work with Chen to create a strategic partnership between Meridian and his new algorithm venture, keeping him connected to the company without the constraints of partnership. There was a long silence from Mike's end of the line. "That's not what I expected," he finally said. "Given your history with Sullivan and Vanessa, I assumed you'd jump at the chance to sideline him completely." 6 weeks ago, I would have, I acknowledged, but the situation has evolved. This approach makes more business sense for Meridian long-term. "And the personal aspect?" Mike asked carefully. "The revenge element that was driving this whole acquisition initially?" I considered my answer before speaking. "I've realized that true power isn't about controlling others," I said, echoing Eleanor's wisdom. "It's about controlling myself, my choices, my future. Continuing to define my decisions based on hurting Sullivan and Vanessa keeps me tethered to the past. I'm ready to move forward. Wow, Mike said, sounding genuinely impressed. That's remarkably mature, Alex. And unexpected. Trust me, I've surprised myself. I admitted with a small laugh. But it feels right. For Meridian and for me personally. Well, from a purely business perspective, I can see the logic. Mike conceded. A clean separation from Sullivan avoids a protracted battle for clients that could damage everyone involved. And a strategic partnership with Chen's algorithm venture could be valuable. He paused. I'll need to present this to our investment committee, of course, but I think they'll support it if the numbers make sense. They do, I assured him. I'll send over the financial projections for both scenarios. After ending the call, I sat back in my chair, feeling lighter than I had in months. The decision to let go of my vendetta against Sullivan and Vanessa wasn't easy. Part of me still craved the absolute victory I had originally envisioned. But the path I had chosen offered something more valuable. Freedom from the past and a future defined by my own terms rather than by their betrayal. I scheduled meetings with Chen and Sullivan separately for the following day, preparing different proposals for each. Chen's would focus on a strategic partnership that allowed him to retain his shares while pursuing his algorithm venture with Meridian's support. Sullivan's would offer a clean exit, a fair price for his shares, and a non-compete agreement narrow enough to allow him to start fresh with his most loyal clients. Vanessa, I decided, would stay at Meridian in her new role. Her capabilities were genuine, her contributions valuable. Working together would be complicated initially, given our history, but professionally rewarding for both of us. And perhaps, in time, the awkwardness would fade, replaced by a different kind of relationship. Not what we had before, but something new, based on mutual respect and shared goals. As I finalized the proposals late into the evening, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing even during the height of my revenge planning. This wasn't about reacting to what had been done to me anymore. It was about actively shaping what came next, for Meridian and for myself. The company Vanessa worked for was now mine, but not in the way I had originally intended. Not as an instrument of revenge, but as a platform for growth. Not as a weapon to wield against her, but as a business we could build together professionally, separate from our personal history. She had said, "I never loved you," and those words had created something neither of us could have anticipated. Not just the acquisition of Meridian, but my transformation from the man she had left behind to the man I was becoming. A man defined not by what had been done to him, but by what he chose to do next. Tomorrow would bring negotiations, compromises, the messy reality of implementing my vision. But tonight, for the first time since Vanessa had walked out of my life 4 months ago, I felt genuinely at peace with where I was and where I was going. The revenge story I had scripted for myself wasn't ending as I had planned. It was becoming something else entirely. Not a tale of retribution, but one of renewal. Not about destroying what others had built, but about building something of my own. And perhaps that was the most satisfying revenge of all. Sullivan took the news better than I had expected. Perhaps he had already recognized the inevitability of change at Meridian, or perhaps the opportunity to leave with his dignity and a significant payment was more appealing than continuing to fight a battle he was unlikely to win. "You're serious about this," he said, studying the offer document I had presented. "You're actually willing to buy me out instead of forcing me out. It's the most practical solution for everyone involved," I replied, echoing Vanessa's words from our dinner. "You get the freedom to start fresh with the clients most loyal to you personally. Meridian retains institutional stability. The employees aren't caught in a protracted power struggle." Sullivan's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you get clear control without the hassle of my resistance." "Correct," I acknowledged. "It's a business decision that benefits all parties." "Vanessa suggested this, didn't she?" he asked suddenly. "This has her pragmatic fingerprints all over it." I neither confirmed nor denied, but my expression must have given something away. Sullivan laughed, though the sound held little humor. "Of course she did. Always the practical one, our Vanessa." He tapped the document thoughtfully. "And what about her? Where does she fit in this neat arrangement you've designed?" "Vanessa remains at Meridian in her current role," I said carefully. "Her professional capabilities warrant the position, regardless of personal history." Sullivan studied me with new interest. "You've changed, Carter. When you first showed up at Meridian, you were out for blood, mine and hers. Now you're proposing business solutions and acknowledging her professional value." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't think you had it in you to separate the personal from the professional." "Neither did I admitted. "But here we are. He considered the offer for another moment before nodding slowly. I'll have my attorney review it, but preliminarily, I'm inclined to accept. The terms are fair, and the opportunity to start fresh has its appeal. He looked up at me. I assume there's a timeline for my response? 1 week, I confirmed. Chen has a competing offer on the table that I need to address by then. Sullivan's expression registered surprise, then understanding. Ah, so that's the leverage. Chen is selling his shares, and you're giving me first option on an exit before simply buying him out and forcing me into irrelevance. I prefer to think of it as offering you the most advantageous option first, I replied mildly. But essentially, yes. He actually smiled at that, a grudging respect visible in his eyes. Well played. He stood extending his hand. I'll have an answer for you by Friday. I shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip. A businessman acknowledging a well-executed move rather than a vanquished enemy surrendering. I look forward to it. After he left, I felt a curious sense of anticlimax. The confrontation I had anticipated for months, the showdown between Sullivan and myself, had transformed into a relatively cordial business negotiation. The personal animosity was still there, underneath the professional veneer, but it had been channeled into a productive resolution rather than destructive conflict. Chen's meeting later that afternoon went equally smoothly. He was receptive to the strategic partnership concept, seeing the value in maintaining ties to Meridian while pursuing his algorithm venture with greater freedom. This is a more elegant solution than a simple share sale, he acknowledged as we finalized the details. Though I admit I'm curious about your change in approach. Let's just say I've gained some perspective on what I really want from Meridian, I replied. And it's not simply ownership for ownership's sake. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Power is most effective when wielded with purpose beyond its mere possession, he observed. It seems you've discovered that truth relatively early in your journey. By the end of the day, the framework for Meridian's future was taking shape. A clean separation from Sullivan, a strategic partnership with Chen, and a leadership structure that positioned the company for sustainable growth rather than ego-driven expansion. All that remained was to inform Vanessa of the decisions made, partly in response to her own suggestions. I found her working late in her office, focused intently on a client presentation. She looked up as I knocked on her open door, surprise registering on her face. Alex, she said, straightening, I didn't expect to see you this evening. I wanted to update you personally, I explained, stepping into her office but remaining standing. I've met with both Sullivan and Chen today. Her expression became guarded. And I offered to buy Sullivan's shares rather than Chen's, I said simply, essentially implementing the approach you suggested at dinner. A clean break that allows him to start fresh while we maintain Meridian's institutional stability. The guardedness gave way to genuine surprise. You actually did it, she said softly. You chose the practical solution over the emotionally satisfying one. I chose the right solution for Meridian, I corrected, and as it happens for myself as well. She studied me for a moment. And what did James say? He's having his attorney review the offer, but he seemed inclined to accept, I reported. He recognized the practicality of the arrangement, once the initial surprise wore off. And Michael? He's staying involved through a strategic partnership rather than selling his shares, I explained. His algorithm venture will develop in parallel with Meridian's operations, with potential integration points where they make sense. Vanessa nodded slowly, absorbing this information. So what happens now? With Meridian, with the restructuring, with all of it? Now we build, I said simply. We focus on strengthening what works, fixing what doesn't, and creating something better than what existed before. I paused. If you're still interested in being part of that process, I am, she confirmed without hesitation. My commitment to Meridian isn't dependent on James or our past relationship. Good, I said, because your contribution will be valuable. Your insights about the company, about the industry, they're worth more than, I hesitated, then finished honestly. More than any satisfaction I might have gained from using this situation to hurt you. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Alex, for listening to my suggestion, for giving me a chance to prove my professional worth separate from everything else. She paused, and for finding a way forward that doesn't perpetuate the damage we've already done to each other. There was nothing more to say after that. We had reached an understanding, a professional detente that acknowledged our history without being defined by it. I nodded and turned to leave, but her voice stopped me at the door. Alex, she called softly. When I looked back, her expression was thoughtful. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you, for choosing to build rather than destroy. It couldn't have been an easy decision. It wasn't, I acknowledged. But it was the right one. As I walked back to my office, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. From the devastating night Vanessa had told me she never loved me, through the months of cold planning and calculated revenge, to this moment of unexpected clarity and purpose. I had set out to buy the company she worked for as an act of retribution, a way to make her feel the same loss of control I had experienced. Instead, I had found something I hadn't known I was seeking, a new direction defined not by what had been done to me, but by what I chose to do next. A future built on my terms, shaped by my vision, independent of the betrayal that had initially set me on this path. The company was mine now, yes, but more importantly, so was my life, freed from the consuming focus on revenge that had driven me for so long. Vanessa had said 4 words that shattered my world and set this all in motion. I never loved you. Those words had created something neither of us could have anticipated. Not just a change in ownership at Meridian, but a transformation in me. As I gathered my things to leave for the day, I felt the weight of those 4 words finally beginning to lift. They would always be part of my story, but they were no longer the defining chapter. That honor belonged to what came next. The company I would build, the leader I would become, the future I would create. Not as an act of revenge, but as an act of reclamation. Of my power, my purpose, and most importantly, myself.